Hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 211. So glad he could join me. We have a special guest tonight. Penny Harter is here. So a wonderful poet in person. We'll be with her in about 10 minutes. But before we begin, I should say that Rattle's a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this. We love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share, and make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Leave reviews on iTunes. We're trying to drum up those. I realized that the iTunes ranking was kind of low, and it's because I didn't do the keywords right. I think I named the show now Rattle Poetry instead of the Rattlecast, where it used to be the owner was called Rattle Poetry. I think the keyword might work better. Because if you type in poetry, it wasn't showing up really high. But now with more reviews and calling it just Rattle Poetry, I think that might work better. But do leave a review if you find it on iTunes later or Spotify or whatever else, wherever else you might be listening to it. Now, as always, we like to start with our Poets Respond poet. And it's a familiar face this week and a really interesting news article. Alejandro Escudé is here. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
How are you? Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's been a bit, but we've been, you're one of those people who've been in Poets Respond many times. It's close to the record. I'm not sure who has the record. I didn't count, but you're like right up there with maybe a dozen or so. And it's always a pleasure getting to read your poems, which you submit pretty much every week, which is there's sort of a handful of people that submit poems every week that are always good. And it just makes my job so stress-free because I know no matter what happens, there's going to be a great poem. And this was the Convict game. Which you had, and it was about this photograph. Tell us, I'll show the photo on screen so people at home can watch or look along. But tell us what inspired this poem and why it came to be.
Yeah, they caught this convict and escaped convict in Pennsylvania, and then there was this controversy about the fact that they took a group photo with the convict, and when they caught him, and it just struck me as something that was a little bit, it was dehumanizing, despite the fact that it's a killer. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I just think it's, that I wanted to express what that kind of morality, what goes into that decision, to do something like that or not to do it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic to think about. Is that obviously somebody who did such a horrible thing. I mean, talking about humanizing them, feels kind of gross. I mean, to be frank, but there's still a way that by dehumanizing a human being, we become less human or something too. And so it's this tricky situation. I mean, it does look like I could show it on the screen again. It does look like like hunters, a group of hunters posing with a lion or something, like how the poem starts.
That's what it made me think of, just like those hunters who pose with, go out to the Africa and pay people to take them out hunting. Um, and, I just think that that's, we can do better than that, in terms of being professionals.
Yeah, and it's a poem. It feels like one of those poems which I always love, where you don't quite know like what you think. You sort of started out and you figured itself out in the process of writing the poem. Was that accurate to think?
Yeah, because I often don't know. I think the best poems I write about the news, I often don't know what to think.
Mm-hmm.
I just start and then somehow it finds itself. Those are the ones that I think even just in general poetry, that's the best thing to do. Because when it comes out kind of too one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
So it shouldn't be too aware of itself,
Yeah.
because then there's Robert Frost said, no surprise in the reader, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the same kind of idea.
Yeah, I think I like to think of poetry isn't an essay; it's an exploration. Although a good essay is kind of an exploration too. So maybe that doesn't
Yeah,
work, but it's the same kind of thing of trying to discover something in the process of writing is what really the joy of writing and the meaning. That's where meaning comes from.
yeah. I think it's a type of poem,
Mm-hmm.
because you can have other types. You can have like for example, an epic poem knows exactly where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you always need to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's hear it. This is Convict Game. Go ahead and read it. I'll put it on screen. And as everybody's watching along and reading, you can see how you see Alex kind of searching. It's not a lion, and then just sort of goes wherever the poem takes him. So let's hear it.
Thank you. The convict game. It's not a lion, the sun over the Serengeti, and the rifle has not saved the free world. The criminal is caught, yes, but do you recall the human pyramids in Abu Ghraib? The shelter of the human world is the human world. One can't slice morality like a birthday cake. A piece for each officer. Dogs to the front, like Egyptian statues, their lean snouts having sniffed him out in the forests of Pennsylvania. I mean, the fugitive shot a mother in cold blood. But every single photograph is a bloody act. They belie the intrigue of the moment. Ghosts sometimes appear at the edge of them, some from the Civil War, bearded, from both North and South. This September, I thought of the World Trade Planes, the video of the first jet gutting the North Tower like a long silver fish. This murderer stood as the photo was taken, restrained by a trooper in fatigues. The first shot of him caught more like a war photo in heavy brush. Though he was no Che Guevara in Bolivia, waiting for his swift sentence, later he stands as if dead, suicide-like, while an officer, uniform dressed, holds the phone up like a proud father at prom. There's no name for a dehumanizing act, despite the human animal that stands wrecked among a cadre of heroes. He's a mangy possum, a rat, a worm sliced in half, arrested, cut, self-mutilated, bruised. One can hear the dogs' nails clicking on the concrete when it's quiet enough for the snap.
Yeah, and that was a Convict Game by Alejandro Escudé, Sunday's poem on Rattle. Alex, thanks. It's always a pleasure having you on. Good to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Yep,
take care.
Yeah, I'm saying Alejandro Escudé with Convict Game. And if anybody has any poems you'd like to share for Poetry Spawn next week, the deadline always is Friday night at midnight, so you can write any poems about any topics that happened within a week that you sent them. That's how Poetry Spawn works, and the poem we pick gets aired on Sunday, and hopefully the poet can join us on the Rattlecast. So now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Penny Harter. I'm really excited for this episode. Penny Harter will be here in just a moment, so sit tight, and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Like I said, today's guest is Penny Harter. Her most recent books are Keeping Time, Stillwater Days, and A Prayer the Body Makes. Earlier collections include Recycling Starlight, The Night Marsh, Buried in the Sky, Grandmother's Milk, Turtle Blessings, Lizard Light, Poems from the Earth, and Stages and Vows. So a whole bunch of books from Penny. With her late husband, William Higginson, she co-authored the Haiku Handbook, which is one of the most important books of haiku ever written, really, for understanding English language haiku. And with him, she was co-editor of From Here Press for many years. She's also the author of several chapbooks, including collections of haiku. Her awards include 3 poetry fellowships from the New Jersey State Council of the Arts, including the Arnold Gingrich Award, the Emily Dickinson Award from the Poetry Society of America, a Teaching Poet Award from the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and 2 fellowships from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She's here live from New Jersey, and here she is, Penny Harter. Hey, Penny. Good to see you. Oops, you're still muted. Got to unmute you. Are you there now?
Yeah.
There you go. Hi, Penny. Yeah, sorry, I
Hi.
forgot to tell you that.
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's really my pleasure. I was at of course, the Haiku North America conference, and got to, along with Katie Dozier, give the Higginson lecture, you know, in honor of your late husband. And it was really a wonderful thing to do. That's such a great community, and it was too bad we couldn't see you there, but it's so great
Yeah,
to have you now and get to know you.
I had
Yeah.
to cancel at the last minute because of some family problems, but
Hmm.
health challenges. But I'm here now and meeting you in person almost.
Yeah. Well, this is as it's as good as any other way too, because we get to really dig into your life and get to know more about you, which is great. Do you want to start out
Mhm.
by reading a poem?
I shall. So we'll read Portal first.
Yeah.
Portal was a poem. There was a time when I was just picking a word and then seeing where it led me. And Portal was one of those words. A short passage to another room. Let's see definition. Once, a strange door hidden in a wall came out on wheels to divide one room from another. I don't remember that it closed off grandmother's dining room from the living, yet it does so now, emerging from its cavern like a fall of water between me and that table set with stone utensils on white linen. No, not stone, only seeming so as I reach through to lift them. Lost in the estate sale, that green glass globe my mother loved. As we advance in any air, we enter something other, layers shimmering as we pass. Sometimes strands will brush our cheeks as we move from here to there, from now to a time we don't remember, from one world to the next through the wormhole that awaits us. Buried in sand, my feet emerge again, grains falling one by one.
Yeah. And that was Penny Harter's poem "Portal" from her
And it's a
newest book.
typo.
Yeah, "Keeping Time," Hyben for the Journey, and Penny. So tell us about the Hyben form for people who aren't familiar with it. How would you describe the Hyben form, and what are the components, and why are you drawn to it?
Well, for the longest time, I wrote just free verse and occasionally a rhyming poem for some years. When I met Bill, I got hooked into haiku and was going to the Haiku Society in New York. But I really wasn't that familiar with Haiku at that time. Of course, I learned more about it in the working on the Haiku Handbook. But basically, originally it was to depict a journey, about show, Journey to the Far North. And it's come to be a journey of many kinds. It can be a geographical journey, it can be an internal journey, it can be a journey of discovery, as you referred to earlier, discovery. It can, from my point of view, it can even be a fantasy or some mix, but it does have to go take you somewhere, and self-realization or some kind of destination. So it's prose poem almost actually, blocks with haiku, which can be inserted before, after, anywhere in the middle. It's up to the writer to decide, and the challenge is to find an appropriate haiku to go with what you're saying that does not continue the narrative directly.
Hmm.
But I've often likened it to throwing a pebble into a pond and then there are the ripples.
Uh,
It relates in terms of theme, it relates in terms of mood, um, but it shouldn't be direct narrative. Once in a while, I fall off a little bit in that direction, but mostly I try to do the former and let it relate. So that was the Lost in the Estate Sale, that green glass globe my mother loved, linked to the memory of my grandmother's dining room. However, the door hidden in the wall was actually in Bill's and my apartment. It was an old apartment.
hmm.
Um, and the same with the sand. I went through the wormhole, came out the other side, grains falling one by one.
Hmm.
So I love the high blown form because of its challenge. And as I sent you, I don't know whether we'll get to it later, but there are times when I've taken a narrative poem or a free verse poem that didn't quite work for me and recast it into Highland, changed it somewhat in the doing, and found that it worked better for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I like haiku better in this context.
Mm-hmm. You say you like haiku better in the context?
Well, I like haiku, but I tend to write more of them this
Mm-hmm.
way than as standalone.
Yeah, it's really nice. I think one of the things I was thinking about reading the book actually was, you're talking to Richard Gilbert, who was one of the first guests on the Rattlecast, about the way that, in traditional Japanese poetry, the biography of the poets, and with Gendai, the modern haiku too, the biography of the poets often plays into the haiku, where we have in the Western canon, we have this idea of like the death of the author, and it's not as much known. And so, for a lot of great haiku, you need to know some about the poet, his life to really appreciate it. And so it seems to me, reading through these, a way of sort of expanding on the haiku too, and making it like more understandable, sort of contextualized, even though it's a leap between the two, it sort of gives the haiku something to push off, which is, haiku standing alone on the page has no context whatsoever. Whereas with prose surrounding it, we get a whole bunch, even though it's a sort of one remove, sort of a cut itself between the haiku and the prose.
A leap.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, of course, the haiku alone on the page is also its own little universe.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I agree with you. That's a nice way of putting it. And a lot of the poems in this book, well, in the preface, I talk about the first two sections are poems written before the lockdown, and then the final section is after. But a lot of them are memory, autobiographical, and that's okay. Those are my journeys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting too. I think as far as I understand it, that in Japan, haiban isn't a really popular form, and so it's sort of in English is we can't sort of do haiku as well as Japanese does, because we don't have the whole books of season words and all that history to play with. It's a way to contextualize and sort of make, for English haiku in an interesting way. And that sort of haiban really is a blossoming form. You see haiban all over the place. We, since doing the Japanese forms issue of Rattle, which we published a few haiban, we get haiban all the time. And, every issue almost includes a haiban or two, whereas we don't get as many submissions for haiku. And so it may be a way to bridge to the gap between sort of traditional poetry, if you can call it that, and in the haiku community.
Yeah, and at the very end of my book, I have a page, tips for writing haiku. So if anyone is interested enough to want the book, there are 8 tips there. It starts out, a haiban is not a short story, it relates a journey.
Mm-hmm.
Down from there.
Yeah. Well, let's hear another one. Which one do you want to do next?
Okay. Well, I'll do Night Howls. I'll do Night Howls.
Okay.
I don't know, my computer is beeping, I guess.
Well, everything's fine, so it's okay. I can't even hear it either.
Oh, good. This one, actually, you published in Rattle, and I like it because, well, the section that it is in are not necessarily pretty.
Mm-hmm.
The one before that is about a spider and jellyfish tide and people cursing, and this one, Night Howls, was an actual experience from Santa Fe when Bill and I lived there for 11 years. We had a railroad track and some sort of wasteland behind the house, and there was sort of a gully and then houses. Night Howls. When the drunk neighbor across the tracks beats his dog again, the primal howling jerks us from a dreamless sleep. Once I used binoculars to see what manner of man yells, "Shut the fuck up," at a dog. After the fire, an acrid stench halos the burnt trees. How convenient for this man to have a dog. How practiced they both are at it. The dog on a short chain cowering behind his doghouse. The man descending the back stairs with yet another chain wrapped around his fist. Repeated whistle of the midnight freight, headlight bearing down.
Yeah, and that's just a great example of the haiban form. The leaps between the content, the story that you're telling, and then the haiku, which goes in a completely different direction, from the dog and the scene on the journey to the fire, and then later to the train, which are completely disconnected, but sort of connected in emotional spirit, or I guess you could say, or they're almost like metaphors for each other. And the way that everything in the world is kind of a metaphor, we can leap from the feeling of the poem into the feeling of a haiku, even though they're different, but they're connected at the same time.
Well, and I'm just noticing now my word choice in the first haiku, after the fire, an acrid stench, which of course is what the neighbor is, halos the burnt trees. The word halo usually has a positive connotation, but that's what came to me. So it's interesting, almost a contradiction.
Yeah. And what is your process for writing Haibun? Do you start with the prose and then build the haiku off that, or do you have sort of a body of haiku more often, and you're sort of looking at what you can combine with the haiku?
No, I usually start with the prose.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know why, that's just the way it's worked. And sometimes it will end up being a prose poem, but it wants to be a haiku. And so I go back and look at it sometimes and then decide where to insert a haiku and then hope to find just the right one. And that takes some doing sometimes. A few times I have started it with a haiku or written it, inserted a few haiku, and then decided, well, it needs one up front. What can I put up there to open it up? But that is less frequent for me. Usually they're inserted, and some are very short. And as I told you, I chose not too long ones to read from this book, but some of them are quite long. They're a page and a half. But yeah, so I usually start with the prose part. It's funny because for me, I don't know if you were going to ask me this, but for me, whether I'm writing free verse, whether I'm writing haibun or haiku, it's all one thing. I don't make sharp. The poem knows what it wants to be when I'm writing it, and I don't make a sharp demarcation between this kind and that kind. And that's why sometimes I slip between them. I'll start with this and I'll go to that, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way the movement goes. I mean, it's sort of all about the movement, about comparing, even the title to the prose, and then the haiku to the prose, and then, the swirl of all three together. And then, as you mentioned, many have different, multiple haiku, like the one the two that you've read so far. So there's a lot going on. It's a real big mixed bag of poetry. And it's really interesting to me, too, because I do think that haibun are sort of a bridge. I've never understood why the haiku sort of community thinks of itself separate from the poetry community, or why the poetry community doesn't embrace haiku. I mean, to me, haiku is the most fundamental poem. I mean, it's creating this entire world in this little tiny breath. And it's based in, rooted in metaphor because of that cut, the juxtaposition between the two halves of a haiku. And really, a poem or a haiku is a poem distilled into sort of its tiniest, densest unit. And I don't understand why there's it feels like a separate community.
It shouldn't be. I don't think it should be. Just as the haiku has that leap or cut or jump juxtaposition, I think good free verse poems have to do that too. They have to have a turn somewhere, not just representation, but they are a journey.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
they need to take us somewhere.
Yeah, it's a great sort of reminder too to sort of traditional poets that you have to have a sense of movement in your poem. I mean, one thing, the volta in a sonnet, it acts in the exact same way as the cut in a haiku, and it's even a haiku is a short, long, short, thing, and then usually the cut is after the second line, although it can be sort of anywhere. But that's like the same sort of ratio as a sonnet works too in that traditional way, where you have to have a turn by line 8, and if you don't, it doesn't feel like you went anywhere. And a haiku is like just an even more dense unit of that.
No, I agree with you. And I have, it's funny, from time to time I have collections of haiku, some of which are on Press from Here Press published, some of which have appeared in other contexts like Stages and Views, which was a whole other thing, written to Hiroshige and Hokusai woodblock prints. But I find that because I've written free verse for so many years, and because haibun is now fascinating me and has been, that I just don't pay as much attention to the time that I want to give to haiku. That's why, there's haiku. They give prompts, and you're supposed to write a haiku each day And I like that because the prompt is something that triggers me to write a by itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing about sort of the haiku community is that there's a sense of appreciating things because it's about noticing and looking at the world in a small detail and sort of bringing that detail to life into memory and storing that way. And it's just a wonderful daily practice. You know, we talk about the practice of poetry, and haiku is just such a great non-theistic sort of religious practice that you can do to appreciate life and the world around you. And you see people at the haiku conference are just wonderful, happy people, so much happier than any other kind of place you could go. There's just so much joy in the world. I think it has to do a lot with having that be a regular practice of noticing and appreciating the world.
There are two haiku that I wrote recently that I'd love to share.
Yeah, please do.
I am now in my early 80s, believe it or not.
I don't.
And I don't either. I don't know how this happened. You know, this is my own hair. But anyway, I wrote, in her 80s, she forgives everything, falling leaves. And then, because I was listening to Jane Hirschfield's interview with Tara Brach the other day, and she talked about forgiveness and acceptance. And then for the acceptance of what comes, and then I wrote, every day messages from the sky, sun, clouds, sun. So yes, I do write the occasional haiku all by itself.
Yeah, well, it's a great thing all around. Let's go back to the book and read another poem from Keeping Time.
Okay. This is the title poem. It's interesting because it pulls in the imagery on the cover, the Santa Fe. Bill and I lived there for many years. And the canyon, the Red Canyons. It also pulls in a dream, and it ends in my kitchen. Keeping time. Two hawks circle far above, afternoon sunlight gilding their wings as their shadows swiftly cross the road before me. In red canyons of the west, ravens ride the thermals, their harsh calls dark as the storm clouds shadowing the ridges. Again, that dream of refuge in a cave above the river. There is no other place but here, where hawks still prey on the living, ravens descend on the dead, and the clock on the wall keeps time above a granite countertop, its polished surface chilled by mountain winds. A gas burner spurts blue, steam hisses from the kettle, and between my palms a cup of black tea deepens as my breath rises warm through the strata of the sky. Nursing, the baby smiles, milk bubbling from her lips.
Yeah, wonderful poem, Keeping Time. That's the title poem from the book,
Title
Keeping
poem
Time.
of the collection. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so why did you choose this as the title poem? How is Keeping Time the central metaphor of the book?
Because the book is a portrait of time, passing time. In the very beginning, when I talk, there's a preface to the book, and I say, I've organized this collection as a calendar of days, first by seasons of the heart, and then by actual seasons. I hope you enjoy the journey. But I would say that probably from the very beginning, when I first started writing in my mid-20s, that time has been a central riddle and also affirmation in almost everything I write, one way or another. Of course, the mystics say time doesn't exist, so do some scientists. It is a construct we impose, but we're caught in it one way or the other, and whether we invent it or whether it's inventing us. And so I think most of my poems have that feeling of moving through time. It fascinates me. If I had the brain of a quantum physicist, I would be happy because I'm very fascinated with quantum stuff and as much as I can understand it.
Yeah, well, that's why I love the cover image too of the crows, or I guess it's crows.
I don't know. Well, in the West, they might be ravens. I'm not sure what, but I love the red rock. And
yeah, there's something about one of the raven and crow has a the point at the tail, and the other doesn't. and I can't ever keep it
That's
straight.
interesting. Yeah. So I don't know.
But
The
but
cover image is by a photographer called Patrick Hendry,
mhm.
taken from his photograph in Unsplash.
Yeah, and I just love though the that sense, because that's what I think about all the time when you go to a place like that. Those kind of those rocky areas that those rocks have been here for so long, and on the American Southwest there's pictograms on so many too, and you just
Oh,
that sense of
beautiful.
like the past haven't actually gone anywhere. That we're sort of it's so easy to think of time as a line because you see it in books, but then when you're out in a canyon like that, you sort of see it as this like permanent presence and the sort of the eternal now. And so that's
I
why I
think
love that cover.
I think of it like that. And I had a strange dream once, punning on the word timetable, which was a very long table with sections. And my understanding in the dream was that rather than reincarnation, recall, or that we were somehow active in all those simultaneously, whatever we means,
Hmm.
you know, aspects of the self or the soul. Pretty interesting dream.
Yeah, and there's dreams are the stuff of poetry. It's
True.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, so tell us a little bit about your journey through poetry, because one of the things we're going to look at a prayer the body makes, some poems from there too, but your poems that are non haiku, non haiban oriented are just wonderful too. And I think you mentioned, I didn't know which you'd come to first, the haiku side or the traditional poetry side. It sounds like the traditional first, but what was your journey like through poetry? How did you start, and how did you discover haiku?
Oh my goodness. Um, Other than the few overly sentimental love poems to my first husband that I wrote in college, my love for you is like a Christmas tree, etc. I read voraciously as a child. That was my universe. But I really didn't write very much. I should have seen clues because for papers I would pick, Emerson's The Poet or do a structural study of a poem as if it were a symphony and stuff like that. But I didn't really start writing until my mid-20s. I went to Douglas College. I graduated. I was teaching. I'd done all the requisite things, but it wasn't enough. And I sang with the Rutgers Choir, and I went to more than one concert, and I became fascinated more than once with the harpist.
Hmm.
And I felt she's one with that instrument. That's her passion. And I thought, damn, I need a passion,
Oh
but I
wow.
didn't know what it would be.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, one time, I was waiting in the car while my then husband, was in a meeting. He taught music. Um, and I looked up at the moon and I wrote this thing about the moon. And I'm on a scrap of dry cleaning receipt about climbing the branches like a little kid trying to touch the moon. Black branches for your stairway. Climb it if you dare. When you reach the topmost step, there'll be darkness there. Like you're not going to get the moon. But anyway, I was so fascinated with what had come out of my pen. That was it. And then from that time on, I probably bored my friends to death because I was writing all the time and scripts and scraps and carrying them around in my purse. Um, and people encouraged me, some people at Douglas, and I just kept on. And then I found that any major, or even minor, but major life passages, marriage, birthing children. I heard Sharon Olds read her poems of the body, and I thought, oh, you can write about those things. Wow. And then I wrote some poems about that and my kids and me and my as a mother. And it went on from there. But later I found too that something I think you said, I don't remember if you said it or Alex said it, but about discovery. And in writing the poems, I was discovering things about myself that I didn't know I knew. And they were popping out and coming out, and that was fascinating. And it was a gift to me, like an unveiling almost. And then I hoped that I remember being so excited. Bill published my first book, House by the Sea, um, and then New Rivers published a book, and Warthog Press, and these are oldies now. But it was every time. Oh, and before even that, I discovered that column in the Writer,
Hmm.
and I forget who the first person was, but I remember jumping up and down because my name was mentioned, honorable mention. And then the poems published. And Ruth Stone was editing that at one point too. That's how I got to know her. So it was just a sequential journey that kept growing, and I never stopped. And it's seen me through loss. I've written my way through pain, through loss, through grief, through joy, because it helps. I mean, when I lost Bill, I had that book, Recycling Starlight, which, I mean, it's very real. It's out of print now almost. But it starts in the ICU, and it goes through a year of grief. I think of the wonderful poems that Barbara Crooker is writing, and also Rosemary Watola Hummer. Loss is awful, but it can trigger you you can find your way through it with the help of your practice.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say, what would you have done to find an outlet for that if it weren't for poetry? Is there any sort of inkling of that, or yeah?
But other people can find it in art or music, or sometimes in interacting with others, giving of yourself. For many years here in South Jersey, after I moved down near my daughter, I was in Santa Fe and then in Summit for a while with Bill, and moved back to be with family. And then I moved down here after he died. And I helped to lead, and then totally led, a grief support group for widows and widowers for like 10 years, which ended when COVID stopped the in-person meetings. And at that point, I thought, okay, I've had enough. I'm very empathetic, and I was feeling all that grief, and but that was a giving back. That was another kind of practice. And it was creative in its own way, just like teaching had been.
Well, let's hear the next poem in the list.
Okay, let's see. That would be Fog Shrouded. This goes with the weather the last couple of weeks. Fog Shrouded. Today was hot and humid here in southern New Jersey, the air hinting of possible thunderstorms pre-dawn. I'm reminded of the opening words of an old English madrigal from the 1200s, one I enjoyed singing in an a cappella madrigal group years ago. Summer is a-comin' in, loud to sing cuckoo. Summer is coming in, loud sing cuckoo. Somehow we must be able to sing summer in these hard days, even when so much of the world is aflame with violence, consumed with grief. In the distance, a child cries, smoke on the wind. It's hard to find a song inside us when we grieve, or when our fists clench in anger. Sirens blare from the television in the living room, screams echo, car horns blare. I've never heard a cuckoo sing, but a year ago May, when I woke to a foggy morning, fog shrouded, this morning's robin sings inside me.
Yeah, another beautiful haibun that's frog shrouded from Keeping Time. And can you talk to us a little bit about how you go about writing a haiku? Because I think in one way, the haibun is such a great form for people starting out in poetry, because, you can write a sort of a diaristic entry and be good and clean about space, and then that's a good prose section. But haiku are hard. And so how do you approach a haiku? Do you have one side and then you sort of think about the other? How is a haiku generated in your mind?
That's a tough one. I think, first of all, a haiku goes through more drafts than a haibun or a free verse poem for me. And especially like where there's prompts and stuff like that, and I'll write something and then I'll think, oh, no. I'll switch the lines around. And I would just say that it either comes from a moment that I've experienced that I want to capture in tiny form, because the moment needs that kind of compression to be as powerful as the moment has been. Or it would just, I don't know, it's a word or a phrase that'll pop in my head, and then I'll take it to see where it goes with the thought in mind that I want it to be. It's a tiny time capsule. It's a tiny time capsule, and I can't pin down for you, Tim, exactly what prompts me to write haiku versus haibun versus free verse. just that it knows what it wants to be when it happens. And two, I think joining the Haiku Society, immersing myself in haiku, reading lots of haiku. I taught for many years in poets in the schools from like second or third grade on up. And I was fearless. I mean, I walked into fourth grade classrooms and had them writing haiku, and they were good. And how do they learn? By osmosis, by just immersing them in them, and talking about, how they work and so on, but not too much, because mostly just the example, the lesson that I wrote in the Haiku Handbook, about using examples to trigger, putting something on the board and writing the group, having the group contribute, and then moving toward individual. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer for you, but I usually start with an image in my mind, and I'll get that first line down, which sometimes becomes the last line or the middle line, but it takes me to the other couple of lines. So.
And you mentioned, that they go through the most drafts, the haiku. Why is that? What are the usual, you mentioned moving stuff around, but what are the kind of, word changes that you tend to do? Yeah.
It has to be distilled. It has to be pared down to the words that do the job, no more, and hopefully not too few. I don't count syllables. I do the shorter, longer, shorter line. And sometimes I've done one line haiku too. I did one, mallards leaving in the water rippled sky. And I use that to show line breaks sometimes, because it can mean, where you break it can change the meaning. Mallards leaving in the water rippled sky, or mallards leaving in the water, but for me it had to be one line. So that's another whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You don't see very many haiku with the cut, the kuriji, in the middle of the line, but you do that kind of with regularity, and there's an interesting effect. So there's a great example right here in Fog Shrouded that we just read, which is in the distance a child cries, smoke on the wind. And so you get the use of that line break, like that enjambment within the haiku, but you also get the cut in the middle of that line too, which is a really interesting way to go about it. Is that something that is that one of the things that you play with in drafts to get, the line breaks right too?
To get the line breaks right, yes. As to where the break happens, it's not intentional. It's just where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it definitely does. Yeah. Well, let's move to another poem, and we're going to talk about the other book too. Yeah, another recent book.
A Prayer the Body Makes.
Yeah.
That has a lot of very personal stuff in it. This one was triggered by learning, and I had known, but I had forgotten. There's a epitaph at the beginning. Numerous studies have shown that difficult to heal wounds respond well to honey dressings. Honey is antibiotic or anti-infection. Healing the wound with honey. Numerous studies have shown that difficult to heal wounds respond well to honey dressings. It must have been inflicted in another life, this wound we can't remember. Not even sure whose it may have been. Sometimes we feel a rift in the flesh needing stitches, or a wound of the spirit that even the heavy blue dressing of the sky can't fix. An invisible fissure in the heart or brain, cradled in our arms like a refugee child, too damaged to weep. Sometimes we hear the bees, whose sting is less important than their task of filling the comb for the queen, or the beekeeper in his white suit and gloves, humming back at the hive. We each have a job to do, the bees to gather nectar and transform it into honey, the beekeeper to steal the pot of gold. And what is our work? We who need to learn the art of scars. We must learn the names of honey, give its sticky sweetness to our tongues, fill our cupped hands with healing, and offer it to the ancestors of our still open wounds.
And that was Healing the Wound with Honey, from A Prayer the Body Makes, a book of more traditional poetry from Penny Harter.
Right.
And just beautiful music. I love. There's so many lines in that poem. The filling the comb for the queen. There's just so many. The rhythmic music of the language is really wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
How does that compare? How is the composition of a poem in that style compared to writing Haibun like the other books?
Quite different.
Hmm.
Um, I think that it unrolls almost like a song, and I just follow it. And I think Alejandro talked about this. You don't need to know where you're going until you get there.
Hmm.
And so I follow it, and one thing leads to another. And then it's different because it's a little less deliberate, I think. With the Haibun, I realize that I'm dealing in a prose block, and I realize that I need to find a haiku that will work. Whereas here, I'm just writing it and seeing what happens, seeing how it unfurls or unrolls, and then and all the poems in here, and then hoping that I go from here to there and come with an ending that's suitable for where I started from.
And that's the thing too. I wanted to ask about is the endings because that poem has a great ending, but the Haibun all do too because it's a great haiku at the end, and it makes me wonder about what an end is to a poem. What is a good ending to a poem for you?
Hmm. One that feels right,
Hmm.
one that doesn't repeat where I've been before, one that maybe contains a surprise or a startling turn, um, and yet fits. I think I like to surprise myself with the endings, which sounds strange since I'm the one writing it, but you know what I mean, right?
Hmm.
It comes out of a place that I didn't know was there, and then suddenly there it is. So sometimes in revising a poem, and some of these I revise quite a bit, others I hardly revise, they just come, you
Hmm.
know. But sometimes in revising, I will knock out a whole stanza. I will move the end further up and come up with a new end. Very often I'll knock out the beginning because I realize the poem doesn't begin there. It begins, that was the warming up verse.
Hmm.
And now the poem begins the next stanza, or even beyond that. So, but as for the endings, if I've got an ending that I think I don't like, or it goes too far, or it's repetitive, I have no qualms about chopping it and starting again, or discovering that the ending really was in the stanza before.
Hmm.
That can happen too.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear, how the poems come to be. If anybody's any questions for Penny Harter, leave them in the chat windows either on Facebook or YouTube, and I will pass them along. But let's hear another poem, Penny. I think we're going back to
I
keeping
tried to sort
time.
of put them in a order that made sense.
Yeah.
Now this one is relatively new. I acknowledge how old I am, and though people tell me I look younger than I am, but my body sometimes knows it, especially mornings and when we've been through a lot of things in life. So this is called At Home in This Body. I'm at home in this body, where once an entire landscape flourished, verdant hills and valleys, rivers to be forded, mountains fearlessly climbed. At home in this body where once flights of stairs, like the bleachers in the football stadium during college, could be raced up two at a time, where youthful passions flared, pregnancies swelled and delivered two babies, breasts gave ready milk. Slim and energetic, this body boded no betrayal, did not ache upon awakening or fear illness, another fall. Still at home in this body, the landscape narrowed to what's possible these later years. I celebrate what is survival after cancer and chemotherapy, after the new hip, after profound loss, yet continuance. Although some mornings like now, when the dream door cracks open to remind me of what was, I wake to sit on the edge of the bed, rocking my way back into now, this home. Another morning. My arms rise like wings in this autumn light.
And I was at home in this body, taking a look back at Keeping Time, Hyben for the Journey by Penny Harter. And Penny, it's interesting. I think of you already as a poet who, writes for yourself. Like there's a sort of a sense that it's healing for you and that, you're listening to the music and it's improving your life. But there's a component about sharing poems too that's so important. I think if there's a way that if you just kept them in a notebook, it wouldn't be the same as sharing them with other people. How much do you think about that, about the audience that you have, given that you're a poet who's writing and sort of exploring your own psyche? How much do you think about the person who's eventually going to be reading these?
I think about it, but not necessarily in the context of publication in a book. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for the books that I have, and my hope and dream is that they will reach out to other people and nourish them in some way or inspire them. But I don't know if I told you, I guess I did, that during the lockdown for many months, I wrote daily. Mm-hmm. And I wish I were still doing that, and I may start it again. And I wrote it, and I kind of quickly revised it, and I published it on Facebook. I put it on Facebook, and I said to myself, I don't care if there's, but I've heard what you said about curating. I don't care whether a journal wants unpublished in any form. I want these to reach people, because the poems I was writing then were not only to lift my spirit during some of those long doldrum days, but also hoping to offer people little moments of calm, of oasis, of peace, of hope and joy. And many of the poems, I didn't have that many copies of Stillwater Days, or if I get more, I'll send you one. Many of the poems there were, some of them even started out pretty much in the doldrums, but I made myself, and in hopes that I was bringing others along with me, I lifted them up. Mm-hmm. So at the end, just like my arms rise like wings in this autumn light, I tried to lift people's spirits. So yes, in that case, I was thinking about other people reading them, and people did respond, as they do on Facebook. And I was hoping that I was giving them a gift. Mm-hmm. If they didn't want the gift, well, that's okay, But if anybody was touched by something I wrote, or if their spirit was kind of down and they read it and it lifted their spirit, that's more important to me than almost anything. But also, yes, writing is a gift to myself. Discovering what I'm feeling, getting it out. One time when I was going through a rough patch in my first marriage, and I went to a poetry reading and read all these nature poems, and a friend who was a fellow poet said, "Where's your life in your work?" And I realized I was afraid to name to myself what I was feeling, and that opened a door for me too.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I mean, there's a power in sort of taking command and naming things and naming your own feelings and putting them to words and then being able to share them with others. And I think that's one of the main reasons why poetry is so healing. But you mentioned, during the pandemic, and I do have a copy of Stillwater Days.
Oh,
so you did send one, yeah. So if you'd like to read any poems from there, we could read a poem from there too. But it was so interesting because there were so many. People were just so, poetry was such an important thing for people, especially that first, 6 months of the pandemic. For Poets Respond, we were getting, thousands of submissions a week. And all about the pandemic, of course, as people were healing through it. Everything was up by a factor of 5 or 10. And, and so we had the open lines where, if you go back and look at our YouTube channel, anybody, you want to look back at the beginning of the pandemic, we had these open line things that went for 3 hours for people just sharing poems. And it was really a healing thing too. And so you're able to do that for a lot of people through social media with the poems from Stillwater Days. Is there one you want to read?
I can. I'll read. Thank you for the invitation. I hadn't remembered that I sent it to you. Let's see. I'm going to read the next to the last poem,
okay.
Page 63, For the New Year. And this is Memories of Santa Fe. For the New Year. On this first day of the new year, may all the birds I remember coming to the 2 feeders we hung from the branches of the Russian olive near that long-ago window, gather again here under this dawning sky to enjoy suet, sunflower seeds, and millet. I can't recall the name of the store where we got the bags of birdseed, but I do recall the pleasure you took in filling the feeders, defeating the wily squirrels, and our rare glimpse of a red fox running alongside the tracks behind the house, as we watched the constant fluttering of sparrows and finches. And then came the flickers, those gorgeous visitors, who suddenly blessed our yard with their red caps and brilliant speckled plumage. On this first day of the new year, I'm feeding too, pecking at seeds of the past, discarding holes that fell to lie on the snow or in the winter pale grass. My time caught in bird time, as I celebrate both what was and what is, winging forward through those years to this life now, the one where a flock of cardinals darts across the road to light on the barren limbs of a family of scrub oak, small scarlet harbingers, whose wings raise the dead brown leaves still clinging to their cold branches, into the dawning light of this new year, ringing in hope.
Yeah, great poem for the pandemic toward the end of it. That was for the new year, and that's from Stillwater Days, which you can tell the metaphor of that just by the title and the image of the pandemic.
Yeah, and the title poem is very short, if I can find it for you, if there's time.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see. I should look on the table of contents, but I'm just being. Here it is.
41.
Huh?
41, I think.
Oh, he's before me. Stillwater Days. I row out on still waters to gather clouds, net them in my old fishing seine, and stow them in my rusty canoe for when I might need them on a day too bright to see. I gather clouds from blue waters, fill the chambers of my heart with gentle murmurs, find comfort in their slow shape-shifting that mirrors my own these Stillwater days.
Yeah, there's a beautiful phrase, Stillwater Days,
Thank you.
by Penny Harter. Going back to Haiben, Audrey Friedman wants to know where the best places to publish Haiben are. Is there? Do you go to the traditional? We talked about it already, but I feel like Haiben is a way for haiku to break through into traditional publishing, because for some reason, and I don't understand it, but it took forever for even Poetry Magazine to publish a haiku, and then they weren't even haiku, so there was that issue. But I think Haiben, they work through the size of a poem, and so to me it feels like you could send Haiben anywhere. But Audrey wants to know, but Audrey would like to know where the best places for Haiben are. Where do you like to read them the most, maybe?
It's funny, I haven't submitted that many of them to the places because I've been too busy throwing them online. But there's Modern Haiben and Tonka Prose, Contemporary Haiben. There's, if you just Google Haiben publications, you'll find a whole bunch of places. I mean, the article that I sent you has a list of them, but I don't have that in front of me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that was dated then, so some of them have gone out of business. I just think if you Google Haiben or search it on whatever search engine you use, or journals that accept Haiben, I think you'll find quite a few.
Mm-hmm. And going back to, you mentioned teaching Haiben to young poets in
Yes.
fourth grade or so, which of course we do the Rattle Young Poets anthology, so we get to see how brilliant young writers are.
Oh, absolutely.
But there's the whole the stress and the fretting in the haiku world about the 575 thing, and how it's so wrongly taught for almost everybody. Every time we publish haiku as Rattle's daily poem, I get 3 emails that say that's not haiku, it's not 575. So did you find? Yeah,
a children's book that I published, they with Simon and Schuster, I forget who, I think, and they misreviewed it because that's not haiku. It wasn't in the haiku form. It's not haiku.
Mm-hmm.
I often walked into a classroom and they knew I was coming and I was going to do haiku among other things, so they made haiku all over the bulletin board, and they were all 575 and not so good. And I had to really be careful because I didn't want to, put the teacher down. But I just worked very hard to help them understand that in English, many people are no longer counting syllables, and there are other things that are much more important than syllables. I used to give them an example. Tell me the difference, and I can't remember, I'm shamefully can't remember the author of the one I use as the best example, but I would say, on the way to school, a dead cat was in the road. I felt very sad. Well, that's 575, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Mike McClintock, I don't remember, but it was dead cat, open mouth to the pouring rain.
Mm.
Tell me which one you like better. What's the difference? I would ask the kids. And they got it right away,
Yeah, that's
But
just it's the strange thing about it is that it's so clear. It's easy to explain what haiku actually is, and yet because it makes such an easy teaching exercise for kids who are trying to learn syllables, it
I
ends up
know.
being completely corrupted. It's such a strange thing.
So, we had a few more marks. Are we going to go
Yeah,
to
yeah.
them?
I think we have time. We had two left, and yeah, let's do.
It's 7 and 8, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then we'll see what else, if anything, or if there are any other questions. See, this is another body poem. We are in bodies. Bodies are with us, riddles. But this one, I couldn't tell you where this came from. I really couldn't. I think it came from my sense of everything being interconnected, everything being one. We all are. Everything that is. A prayer the body makes. In fetal position, our knees drawn up, arms parallel in supplication, and eyes rolled back into the skull of sleep, that dark absence that swallows us, wrapping us in ivy evergreen from birth to death. A prayer the body makes beyond words, beyond the unheard frequencies of cells broadcasting into the abyss, beyond the arc of another body curling warm against our own, belly rising, falling. Translate, the mind demands. Translate this prayer, that we may all practice it together. Translate the body's pores, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, asleep or awake, in the wordless center, holding all.
Yeah, another beautiful poem. That is a prayer the body makes. And again, that was from
That's the title
the
poem
title
of
poem from A Prayer the Body Makes by Penny Harter. This one too is from Kelsey Books.
Yeah.
And we have a question from Lana Ayers, who was last week's guest, actually.
Yes, I
Yeah.
know.
She wants to know, Lana says, your titles are as wonderful as the poems. Penny, do the titles announce themselves to you after you have written the poem or sometimes arise before the poem? Where do the titles come from?
Great question, Lana. Probably after, sometimes before, sometimes I'll have a title that I'll change. In fact, I'll even have to go back into my Word files and change it. Sometimes it's a line from the poem, sometimes it's not. So sometimes it's the first line. There's no stock way I do it, but frequently I'll start out with one title that is what I think I'm going to be writing about, and I'll write the poem, and it won't be about that as much as I thought it would be. So I'll just chuck that title away and try to come up with a new one. I would say most often, if I look in the book, well, not always though. Among the Roses, The Arrival aren't in the poem, but they describe in the Highland, but they describe what goes on in it. So that I would say in that case, probably I titled it after the fact.
And what do you think goes into a good title? Is there certain characteristics a good one has that you look for?
Well, it has to be somehow it has to relate to the content, and it can't be too generic, too general. It can't be too wishy-washy. I mean, Fog Shrouded. I could have taken anything in that poem. In the Distance, On the Wind. The main idea was that the world was shrouded at that time too.
Yeah.
Still is. So that's the best I can do with that one.
So why, for that poem, I'll put it up on screen again. Oops, I had the wrong book though. It's hard when there's so many books. But on Frog Shout, so why, you said a lot of things could have been the title. Why was it? What was it about Frog Shrouded that you decided? Because it's the.
Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah.
Frog Shrouded. Because first of all, hot and humid. Fog is humid. Secondly, grief consumed with grief. Grief is like a fog. Smoke on the wind. Smoke is akin to fog. And then the fact is that I did wake to a foggy morning and write that haiku at that time, but I put it in here. So that's another thing that I realized we haven't talked about, that sometimes I will steal a haiku from before and enter it into a haibun.
Is there any, what's the feel within the haiku community? Is there an etiquette about that? Like if you published a haiku, but then use it later for a haibun, does that, there's this whole published stuff, which is why I prefer curated, as you know. But does that sort of, can you reuse a haiku, or for a haibun when it's already been published singularly? Is that something that people worry about or not?
I don't worry about it because it's in a different context. So it becomes a different poem to me. And once in a while, I've taken a haiku out of a haibun, not necessarily a published haibun, but, and submitted it as a single haiku.
Yeah. Well, back to the titles, Lana says, your titles make me want to read the poems. So many are so imagistic and or emotional. And I think that is a thing, that the title is the doorway into the poem. And, sometimes you want to open a door and sometimes you don't.
Said that, Tim. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
The haiku is the doorway into the poem. Yeah. The title is a doorway. Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's close up with one last poem. We have one more on the list, and we'll finish out with that.
It's the last one in the haibun book. And it's called Searching for Omens, and here come the ravens again. Migrating across time, ravens have been omens, their raucous bodies dropping from the sky to finish the job on battlefields. And their corvid cousins, the crows, have often brought grim tidings, their coarse caws announcing the death they carry under their wings. For weeks I have been haunted by omens that witness these times, have seen these dark birds circling still. Inverting the toaster, I shake its burnt crumbs into the sink. But now I search for other omens, ones that might bring hope in times of pestilence and war, of senseless slaughter, cruelty, and greed. So I look to the simplicity of this morning's sunlight, the scent of fresh coffee, the miracle of an apple I can slice and pair with cheddar cheese. Blooming again in the neighbor's garden, a widow's rose bush. And as I break my nightly fast, I give thanks that I'm still here, having survived what we all must, my shares of sorrow, loss, illness, the turbulence of years. Perhaps I am here for this, to love the broken world, affirming again and again that even on those days when the dark birds haunt us, we must seek sustenance in our daily bread and do whatever work we can to praise the light.
Yeah, that was Searching for Omens. Another great example of the use of the haibun, how far it goes, I love, from the the crows and the birds to inverting the toaster. I shake its burnt crumbs into the sink. And that really is the joy, because you never know where you're going to go. A haibun as a form keeps poems so surprising and so interesting the whole time, because it's always like, here comes something, and I don't know what it's going to be. And then it's always something, interesting that relates in a strange way and has a mental leap that you make this connection.
And I didn't know what it was going to be till it arrived.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so fascinating to join you on that journey. And I do think that, if we had, haibun is a practice of people journaling and thinking about the world that way, I think we'd all be better off, like spiritually and emotionally. I think that haibun is a thing that it'd just be wonderful if we get more people to do, on their own, not even necessarily publishing them, but just writing them.
People can. I mean, I recently did a workshop for senior citizens here down in the library, and they all wrote haibun. And I'll emphasize that again. One of the ways to encourage people to write haibun, haiku, whatever it is by example. And not just my own, but immerse them in the genre, and then let's talk about it like we're doing now. And then it'll come. And they can do research if they want. I mean, they can, understand about how you put the haiku in, and the haiku shouldn't be a part of the narrative and so on. But you got to let it flow.
Mm-hmm.
Got to take the risk.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to close out the interview, because that seems like how you approach poetry, Penny. And it's really great to meet you and get to know you and know that spirit.
It's been a wonderful a wonderful exchange. I was a little nervous. I didn't know what we would say. And I thank all the people that may be watching
Oh,
too.
definitely. Well, it's always just fun. Never not anything to be worried about because we're just chatting about poetry, which is something we all love. But thanks again, Penny, for being here and sharing these 3 wonderful books with me.
Thank you very much,
Yep.
Tim.
Take
My
care. Have a
pleasure.
good night. Bye.
Thank you.
So it was Penny Harter. And of course, we had 3 books by Penny. We have Keeping Time, Hyben for the Journey. We have A Prayer the Body Makes, a book of traditional poetry, I guess you could say. And then Stillwater Days, the book of poems about the pandemic. And you can find all of those at Penny Harter's website, which is pretty easy. It's pennyharterpoet.com. You can find all those books and more, all of Penny's vast collection of books. So do check those out at pennyharterpoet.com. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our open lines. And of course, open lines, how they work, you can share whatever you'd like. 1 poem per customer, 2-page max, I think, is the usual thing that we do. And if you want to share a poem, the easiest way to do it is to email it to me right now to open mic. That's openmic@rattle.com so that I can show it on the screen. And then I'm going to take this link to the Zoom, which Penny was on, and add it to Facebook and YouTube so you can all join us. So I'll paste the things into YouTube and Facebook. I'm trying to do it right now, and there you go. So join the Zoom if you'd like to share anything. I'll be right back in just a moment with more poetry. And we're back. Now, the prompt poem for this week, I'll put it on screen, or the prompt for this week. And I should stress, you don't have to share prompt poems. I don't know if I said that already. You can share whatever you'd like. You can share poems about current events, stuff you've published recently, stuff you've wrote recently, whatever you'd like to do, feel free to share. But we do have a prompt every episode inspired by last week's guest. And last week's guest was Lana Heckman Ayers and her poem. Well, actually, I'll invite Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor, on the air. Hey, Katie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I love that interview so much. The only thing you didn't cover was how to stop writing Hyben.
Yeah,
That's
that's
my
a good
problem
point. Because
personally.
once you start, it's kind of addictive. You can turn,
Yeah.
and then it's also like, why write a haiku when you can make it a hyben?
I know.
But anyway, that is not the prompt for this week. Although maybe later, I don't know. We'll see. But the prompt for this week was to write a sequel, a poem that refers to another poem and starts immediately after the events of that poem. So this was a form that we kind of made up with talking about it because Lana likes to do a lot of after poems. And you wrote one and I wrote one. What was your experience writing it?
Well, what I really liked about it was that calling it a sequel and being so referential gave me kind of freedom to like really dig into what I like about a particular poem and replicate it more than I would have felt like. I don't know if I just called it an after, if I would even feel comfortable being as close as I was able to get into the poem. So I thought it was fun. I hope everybody else thought it was fun.
Well, for me, I did find I have a little trouble like not trying to use the voice. At first one I tried to do, and I'll share the one I actually did in a minute, but I tried to do The Snowman by Wallace Stevens, which was the first poem I ever loved back when I was like 15 or something. And I was like, it's like an imitation of Wallace Stevens instead of my own poem. And so that wasn't working at all. I was like, I was like, the one who must have a mind of winter, one who must have a mind of spring. And then it was like, and then you have to describe things in the way that Stevens did. And it didn't feel like it was me, and so I did something else. Did you have that trouble at all, or did you just crank it out?
I decided just to lean into it because I did mine on Maggie Smith's poem Good Bones, and I finished reading her memoir. So I felt like very, very versed in like what her life was like, and I decided just to allow myself to be really close while being very respectful. And I could not scream more like this is based on Maggie Smith's poem. So I don't feel like it's a problem if you're doing that. But you're pretty close to the Snowman poem. You used to recite it in your head when you were little, right? So maybe you're too close to that.
I think that might have been the problem. Like I couldn't get out of it. I was just like stuck inside the snowman. And the whole point of the poem was supposed to be like you get out of the snowman, but it didn't. I was stuck, like linguistically, musically,
inside of the snowman.
No,
literally inside of the snowman.
A lot of nothingness. So I think if what we'll do is if people want to share, the source poem too, as long as it's short, it keeps it under that 2 pages. Do you think it's worth sharing Good Bones, or do you think people know it well enough? It's one of the most viral poems that's been shared the most for the last decade or so. Do you think we should read it? It's a great poem.
That's totally up to you. I mean, I don't know. It's just as long as people understand it's very referential, my poem is to it.
Well, why don't you read it? Do you want to read Good Bones first and then yours? Okay.
Sure. Okay. Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Life is short, so I keep this for my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep for my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, so I keep this for my children. For every bird, there's a stone thrown at a bird. For every love child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible, and for every kind stranger, there's one who would break you, so I keep this for my children. I'm trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. Yeah. So that was published in Waxwing in 2016. And for those who don't know, went about as viral as a poem can possibly go. Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, for sure. And that, to place everybody back in 2016, that was like the beginning of the Trumpy era, and like things started to feel like they were a little off the rails. So I think that has a lot of, it's something that people could relate to. But but the idea that there's good, behind the walls of the world is a concept that really resonated with a lot of people. And so that was, I think that's why that poem went viral. And it's a great metaphor too. So what was your sequel to that?
Okay, well, my sequel to it is called Even Better Ligament, a sequel after Maggie Smith. Life is long, though I keep this for my daughters. Life is long, and I've stretched mine in a million ways that threaten to snap me, so I'll keep this for my daughters. Life is long, though my eldest doesn't believe it when I tell her to put on her tutu faster. As I pull her hair into a bun, she asks, why are we never running early? Pirouetting through the rooms of this new house, the girl's house, the one we used to only dream about. Life is long, but have you noticed how here it smells like pumpkin pie spice instead of that anger I could never quite bake nice? In every silence, I think of the old coldness and find a knitted throw to wrap myself inside. In every silence, I know that just one pillar can hold up a whole home. To sell them the world, I bought the world myself, and we make this place beautiful.
Yeah, so great sequel there. Great use of the form you made up, Katie. Even better ligaments.
I feel like I'm cheating every week and correct my own prompts. Like, I don't know if it's fair. You guys are gonna kick me out of the open lines, probably.
You couldn't be kicked out. But we'll see what your prompt is next week and at the end of the show. And also, we do the Poetry Space, of course, on Twitter, which is a fun thing, an hour-long sort of roundtable chat. And this week we were talking about contests because the Rattle Poetry Prize was just announced, and contests are a big thing in poetry. A lot of issues surrounding them, the sort of ethics and fairness and using them to generate income. So that's the topic. Anything you want to add about what we'll be talking about? Thursday?
I have a lot to say. I think both the rattle contests obviously are amazing, but in general, poetry contests do a lot of things that I think are ethically a little shady, and I want to call some things out on the space, lay it down
Yeah.
this week.
Well, the one thing, and I'll talk about this in the space, but the extended deadline thing drives me crazy because it almost
Me
makes
too.
you have to extend the deadline. For the like, this is a deadline,
I
people.
know.
Everyone thinks I'm going to extend it. I have to be like, no, we don't extend deadlines because it's like such the norm. Anyway, we'll talk about that and much more. That's Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. No, 3 p.m. Eastern.
3 p.m. Eastern.
3 p.m.
Yep.
Eastern. It's the hard with the time zones. But 3 p.m. Eastern.
It is.
On Twitter, if you're on Twitter, you don't need the app anymore, which is nice to participate if anyone wants to jump on and share their thoughts about contests. And you can do that by looking at Katie's Twitter, which is Katie_Dozier, because she's the host and I'm the co-host. But anyway, thanks, Katie, for sharing that great poem, and I hope you get to stick around. But if not, that's no problem too. I understand.
Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to hearing your sequel.
Yeah,
the sequel to my sequel.
Yeah, my sequel is coming up, and my sequel is right here. Let me find it. So like I said, I tried to write about the snowman at first, the Wallace Stevens poem. And then I was like, well, that didn't really work. But what is an epic poem that I don't know that well, actually? Because I was thinking, as Katie suggested, that it was maybe because the snowman sound is so stuck in my head that I couldn't unsnowman myself. So what I went for is What Work Is, which I couldn't really remember the poem, the Philip Levine poem, What Work Is. And if you don't know that poem, I won't read the whole thing, but it's, someone standing in line, waiting for work, hoping to get a job in the rain, thinks that his brother is a few spots ahead of him in line, and then realizes it's not, but then has this reverie about, missing and never expressing love for the brother, and about what work really is. It's a beautiful poem. And so it made me think about work and my brother. And so this was my poem, After Work, which seemed like a good title. And here it is, After Work. A sequel for Phil and Chris, my brother's Chris. After work. After the clank of the stamp, after the rip of the rivet, after the heavy sack is thrown in the trash, after the box is pushed to the back of the bin, after the grease of an apron is balled in a fist, after the pallet is wrapped, the doors closed, the lock latched, the clasp clicked, the iron lid lifted and shut with a crash, after the fish are fed their little bits of other fish, after they freeze and thaw, after the spark and the arc and the solder, after the meal is rinsed from the dish, after the tailings are stacked and the papers are piled and the air from the furnace moves through them, after the lights are dimmed and the bucket is dumped, after the sigh of the machine shutting off, after the smoke and the beer and the shock of the air, there is still the rust on the rocks at the poles of the moon. There is still the ice at the bottom of its craters, always growing, but never grown full. That is my after work. I try to think of every closing that both me and my brother would have done in all the jobs we've had. So those are all included in there. And that is After Work for Phil Levine and Chris Green. So let's see what everybody else on the call has. And we'll just go in order as we like to do. And Carla Schwartz is up next. Hey, Carla.
Hi. What a wonderful night so far. It's really good. And I really love this prompt, Katie. And especially loved it because, I felt, yes, you can talk about what happens immediately after, but you can also go to a new place by yourself with this poem. So that's what I did. And actually I did two, but I'm only going to do one here. And I will do the first one that I sent you, which was a poem by Stanley Kunitz called Touch Me.
Do you want to read that poem too, or just
Sure.
describe it?
I can read that one. It's pretty short. Let's see. Okay, so summer is late, my heart. Words plucked out of the air some 40 years ago when I was wild with love and torn almost into scatter like leaves this night of whistling wind and rain. It's my heart that's late. It is my song that's flown. Outdoors all afternoon, under a gunmetal sky, staking my garden down, I kneeled to the crickets trilling underfoot as if about to burst from their crusty shells. And like a child again, marveled to hear so clear and brave a music pour from such a small machine. What makes the engine go? Desire, desire, desire. The longing for the dance stirs in the buried life. One season only, and it's done. So let the battered old willow thrash against the window panes and the house timbers creak. Darling, do you remember the man you married? Touch me. Remind me who I am.
Yeah, that was Stanley Kunitz, Touch Me. And I just love that last line, remind me who I am. What a great poem by Stanley. And interestingly, Stanley, we had an interview set up with Stanley, and he passed away right before we had it. He was, yeah, it would have been wonderful. So I feel like I missed, if I just scheduled it a little sooner, he was going to do it. But that was a beautiful poem, Touch Me by Stanley Kunitz. And then here is your
My
response,
poem,
your sequel.
my sequel,
Yeah.
which is called Let Me Touch You. Let the rabbit tend summer's last flowers, my long-lived husband, my pliant muscle. Let me touch you. Let me remind you who you are. Let us curl in bed, each with a book in hand, wait out the torrent storm. Let the raging winds batter our home. We'll rattle, yes, but lie entwined in hush. Yes, I'll remind you, my project poet, of your fenced lyrics, your well-lit free verse, your sturdy elegies. We've patched the mice out of our house many a time, stuffed steel wool up the shower drain at night. Now this creaky home, like us, shows its age. Tomorrow, we'll walk out in steamy air. Take my hand, my heart. It's not too late for love.
Oh, that's beautiful, Carla. I love that. Let Me Touch You after the Stanley Kunitz poem. Yeah, wonderful use of the form to pull, into the future and make it personal. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Katie.
All right, take care, Carla.
You too.
Yeah, it was Carla Schwartz with Let Me Touch You. Let's see. And next in line is Deb T. As Deb Tannenbaum, of course.
Okay, I was getting ready to comment on Carla's beautiful poem, but I will switch gears, and I chose a poem by James Tate. I thought if I'm doing a sequel, I wanted something with some narrative in it, and
that was one of my first thoughts too. It was like James Tate. I could take the one with the goat and the cigarettes, and see what happens to the goat after. But so which James Tate poem did you?
But
do?
I also thought of doing the snowman, and then
that's fine.
Like, yeah.
Well,
anyway,
great
but
minds think alike.
this is At the Clothesline by James Tate. Should I just jump in?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Millie was in the backyard hanging the laundry. I was watching her from the kitchen window. Why does this give me so much pleasure? Because I love her in a million ways, and because I love the idea of clean laundry, flapping in the wind. It's timeless, a new beginning, a promise of tomorrow. Clothespins, God, I love clothespins. We should stock up on them. Someday they may stop making them, and then what? If I were a painter, I would paint Millie hanging the laundry. That would be a painting that would make you happy and break your heart. You would never know what was in her mind. Big thoughts, little thoughts, no thoughts. Did she see the hawk circling overhead? Did she hate hanging laundry? Was she going to run away with a sailor? The sheets billowing like sails on an ancient skiff. The socks waving goodbye. Millie, oh Millie, do you remember me? The man who traveled with cloth napkins and loved you in the great storm.
Yeah, that's a great James Tate poem, At the Clothesline. And here is your sequel.
And my sequel, which I called And After and Before. Millie enjoys hanging the laundry. Today's wind tested her. Sheets worn thin enough to tear, stains gaining ground, and Leon watching her from the kitchen window. They love each other, though she's been feeling distant. There's things she doesn't tell him. He does the same. She runs her fingers over the rich silk of all the thoughts she keeps to herself. How she had once yearned to spark the poet in him, to be cradled in his grateful, attentive gaze, to find herself in his musing, quirky lines. Be careful. Being a muse is a sticky ball of rice, steaming fresh and fragrant for a while. Then its leftover grainy whiteness gone cold, breaking into clumps. Now she longs to be inspired, stirred by the breath of another. Of course, there's the baby on the way. She hasn't told Leon that news. Do they have enough money, enough clothespins, sufficient devotion? Millie lives inside Leon's poem, newly pregnant, hair blowing across her face and into her eyes, holding a clothespin pressed between her lips, dreaming of their baby, the tiny socks she'll pin to the line. She will lie down in the yard swale once Leon's poem is spent, doze beneath the wind, breathe like the ocean, set sail unseen.
Oh, that was wonderful, and it feels kind of like an ekphrastic poem almost, like an ekphrastic based on the thing in your imagination. It's a really interesting poem. I love that line, being a muse is a sticky ball of rice. A very cool poem. Thanks for sharing that, Deb.
Well, thank you for the prompt. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
had a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of people on the lines too today. It's going to be fun to see what everyone's got. And I think the policy for now for the open lines is everybody who is here live will share their poems. So don't worry that we won't get to you. I don't mind. I don't have anywhere to go. Let's see. Caitlin Butzbaum is up next. Hey, Caitlin.
Hello.
Hello. Good to see you.
Yep, you as well. It's been a little while since I've been on.
It has been a bit.
I regret that I came on right as Penny was reading her last poem because I had an MFA meeting before that. And so I got off of that and I went on to the thing and she read one poem and I was like, oh, then it's over. So I don't know. Did she read Blue Sky?
She didn't.
The poem that was published in
she didn't,
Rattle?
but
She
it's in
didn't?
Rattle. So if anybody wants to read, maybe it's a little long, so maybe we should do a summary of it. It's on rattle.com. So people that was from Rattle. So we have, do you want to characterize it and maybe read the haiku maybe? So it's not too.
Okay, I can do that. Yeah. In the document I sent you, I pasted her poem at the front because I wrote a haibun, following that because it's a series of 3 haibun and then I just wrote another one on the end. So her haiku. So this was in the speculative poetry issue, which I thought was really interesting because I wasn't sure if I liked speculative poetry, but I read this and I'm like, yeah, I'm good with that. So
Yeah,
it was
I was
kind
surprised
of
looking back to see that that's one that Penny was in. That she even submitted poems to that, which is, but there is this weird connection between haiku because there's the sci-fi coup, and there's some overlap between the Science Fiction Poetry Association and the haiku of North America. It's interesting, yeah, that connection.
Yeah, so what I got from this poem is that it was kind of a deterioration of world as we know it as a result of climate change-ish things. And I think the haiku really bring them interesting places, but I guess I'll read those. So her first one was Masquerade Party, strangers crowding into a downtown loft. And the next one was Shooting Star, how briefly its wake marks the dark. And the last one, Moon Colony. Again, the supply ship arrives late.
Yeah, I love that last one too. Really interesting haiku there. That's Blue Sky. If you just Google Penny Harter Blue Sky, or if you go to Rattle's Rattle issue 38, you'll find that poem pretty easily. Yeah, so let's hear your sequel.
Yeah, and I will just say that I had no idea what I was going to do when I heard this prompt. I was like, sequel poem? What? I can't possibly follow any great poet. So I just decided, oh, well, Penny Harter is on next week. I'll just see if she has a poem that I can follow in. So that's what I try to do.
Great.
All right. It's not so much about the delayed gratification of dehydrated ice cream bars, a young woman reasons, but the question of whether enough growth will occur on humanity's second home to sustain it. Even here, now, space is taken for granted. Who knows if there will ever be enough life here to fill it? The young woman looks back at the world, sees the pillar of salt that is her parents' birthplace. She looks out at the planets, wonders if the Mars colony feels any more heat from the sun, remembers blue sky. Black caves to white. God tells the universe to begin again.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, an epilogue to Penny Harter's poem. And I know Penny's watching. She said she was going to pop over on YouTube to watch the open lines. So I hope she enjoys that. That's really fun and really cool addition to that poem. I love the haiku, too.
Thanks. I don't know if it's too prosy, but like I tried. And I like this idea that kind of things repeat, like it goes through this cycle of decay and then, starts over.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thanks for writing that and sharing it, Caitlin.
Thanks for having me.
That was Caitlin Bucksbaum with an epilogue to Blue Sky by Penny Harter. Nancy Tennell is next.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah, hi, Nancy.
It gave me a chance to write a sequel to a poem by one of my favorite poets, Richard Haig. And it's a shame Dick Westheimer isn't here tonight because he and Dick are friends.
Yeah, it's true. And we met Dick when we went to Cincinnati for the Haiku conference. So it's kind of all coming around full circle. But we had dinner with him. Interesting guy.
Well, this is one of his older poems. It's in his collection called Garden that was published in 2002. But, and I have it. His poem is called Adam Earth. And below the title, it says, name carved in a picnic table, Eden Park, Cincinnati. And here is his poem. In raw cuneiform, wedged deeply in the green park table, Adam Earth has made his mark. Idling in the sun, I think of him, stranger, man or boy I've never seen, hunched intently, laboring to make his name a part of summer's change and spin. Later, heat struck to a drowse, I start awake and see him at the table's end stand into the blue-green air, moving in his sudden magic leaves, murmuring a song to light. I see him gathered into clover like some blunt bee nudging, delving. See him wedged into crevices of bark, folded thinly as a moth's wing, watching me. Adam Earth. I see him moving like the wind's hand, rippling grass, his small voice living in the birds, his presence like a tingling in the air. He broadens, name by name, to every form around me. Finch, elm, hillside, jay, deep soil. So my sequel is called After Eden. After Eden, I stood in the city's expanse of concrete and glass-walled towers. In a struggle to be present, Adam pushes up through the sidewalk gaps, lingers in the mandated green islands of the parking lots, looms over the occasional rooftop garden to celebrate with the marigolds, coneflowers, and dwarf conifers. The urban landscape is dotted with his random pops of yellow dandelion and white clover, while all around me is the evidence of hydraulics, sprockets, and gears. Adam Earth persists near a willow planted in the city's token oasis, a spot intended to bring softness to a steel high-rise quadrangle. The dangling branches beckon to me, the birds sing a summons, so I stop. I sit on a stone bench, comfortably sharing shade and the respiration cycle, this O2-CO2 exchange we take for granted until the imbalance becomes obvious. Ignoring the sounds of horns, sirens, and motors, I remove my shoes, allow my feet to glide slowly over the soft grass. There is no place here for him to carve his name. So with my finger, I lightly trace Adam Earth on the hard bench, hopeful for the Eden yet to come.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, excellent use of the sequel. And I love that there is no place here for him to carve his name. There's something about the simplicity of that line that has a lot of power. That was after Eden. Thanks for sharing that, Nancy.
All right. You're welcome.
Yeah, it was Nancy Tennell with After Eden, after Richard Haig's poem, Adam Earth. Let's take a quick jump ahead in line and go to Nivedita Karthik, because I know she has to go to work. I don't want to make her have to go, and we have to work, so it's fine. Hey, Nivi, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Tim. I'm doing great, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. So what do you have for us?
I actually have two sequels to one poem by Charles Heath called Daffodils.
Uh-huh.
Both are sort of based on that. And the first sort of sequel poem, which I didn't realize was a sequel poem, I wrote probably 2 years back.
Oh, really?
And
That's
then
interesting.
the other one is the true sequel for this Rattlecast episode. So the Charles Heath poem is just in general about daffodils and about how they're troops of trumpeters of spring.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of went with that theme for both the poems here. Can I read both? They're short.
Yeah, go ahead. They're not long. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so poem 1. I will never plant a daffodil. I will never plant a daffodil because chilled fingers are needed to plant bulbs of daffodils in the cold of winter. However, plant them I do, hoping against hope for a bright spring, waiting and waiting. And finally, here they are, unfurling their buttery yellow petals slowly to the warming winds of spring. And then I'm reminded afresh of why I will never plant a daffodil. It's because of what I see when I do. What do I see? I see troops of yellow marching stationarily with the breeze, wishing fervently to move, to be free, free to express, to wander, to fly. But here they stand, rooted by their responsibilities. So this was a sequel in itself to The Daffodils by Charles Heath. And I have a sequel to this sequel.
Okay.
So it's called Should I? Should I? Then I think again, watch their golden gloriousness. Still, they sway strong in unison, this dream of daffodils. They undulate like a golden ribbon and cut across the somber grey concrete slabs. They tilt their heads this way and that, chitter-chattering among themselves, finding new ways to bring back color to the world after winter's waltz ends. I hope I can be as resilient as those daffodils. Suddenly, season's last snowfall, the daffodil petals bow down and surrender. And I again remember why I will never plant a daffodil.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing. So many great lines in all these poems. I love that I see troops of yellow marching stationarily with the breeze. A great description of daffodils there. Thanks for sharing that, Nivi.
Thank you, Tim. Have a lovely evening. It was a great show as always. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a good day at work.
Thank you.
This is Nivedita Karthik with two sequels, a pair of them. Let's go to Clayton Clark next.
Hi there.
Hey, Clayton. Good to see you. Yeah.
Great to see you. And also, I think I had the problem that you had with the prompt, which was in my own voice. And then my husband was like, shouldn't it sound like the other poem? So I went back, sort of wrote it as best I could to follow James Tate.
Oh, another James Tate. Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll read his. It was of the people. And I sent you two, so I goofed on the first one. I don't know if you can see the second one.
But
anyway,
yeah, I see them both.
Okay. So, A Man of the People by James Tate. My bones and a lovely ache. My bones stretching across the valley in one bite of anything. The wind blowing through them, wanting a sign. The sun blind to them. The animals sniffing them and then running for their lives. My bones looking quite impressive on horseback. And then the sequel is a Man of the People remix. My bones stretch and prick the Appaloosa's ears. My bones make melodic xylophone tones in gusts of wind. Wind sends its mane to flame, and he rears. I fall, gain a mouthful of earth. He falls on me. My bones lie, broken signs. The horse rises, tornadoes into twilight. Mud and sour grass in my skull. Wind down and entwine my sunburned heart. A heart I hung with mine. The ache lovelier still. My bones a pyre. Nirvana, reborn. They form into a real live woman of the people. And then?
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, thanks much. Great sounds. I love the internal rhyme there, Clayton. And yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, that
Have
was
fun.
Clayton.
Great night as always.
Thanks, Clayton. That was Clayton Clark with Man of the People and then a sequel. And a few little glitches there in the audio, but I think it came through all right. Let's see. Nate Jacob is up next.
Hey, good evening again.
Hey, Nate. Good to see you.
Good to be seen. I got a prompt poem for you here.
All right. It's prompts all around.
Yeah.
So far, anyway.
I went ahead and wrote. I think anytime someone asks me about a poem, it's always William Duffy's Farm. I think it's I'm found out soon. So I'm gonna go ahead and read that. Lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota.
All right. I think this is a poem that needs no introduction, right? The
You want me to skip it? Just read mine.
the cow, the golden stones of the cows, and then the I have wasted my life at the end. So if you don't know, that's the poem, and I'm sure everyone who listens to this has read that one.
Should I just read mine then?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just read mine.
Did you have? If you want to read the other one, I think you could too. It's not long. I just didn't see it here, so I figured you didn't want to.
I don't want to test the tolerance level for my voice.
Okay. Well, either way, go ahead.
All right. James Wright's poem. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly, asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for a home. I have wasted my life. Great last line.
Yeah, that's great. It's one of the famous last lines, of all poetry. Let's see what you went with it after the last line. I'm curious.
Mine is titled, After Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's Farm, I was nearly late to my night shift as a line cook in Rochester. Behind the greasy spoon, I see a family of raccoons drunk again on yesterday's scrapings, wobbling into the alley like misshapen bowling balls. Around the corner behind the barber shop, the newly shorn punks rub one another's scalps under the cone of a single skitching lamplight. From 100 yards away, beyond the fence around the park I grew up in, the tornado slide rises up, though just barely, its peeling fiberglass glinting in the searchlight pulse. I lean hard into the bend of my push broom as the crows caw out their constant reminder. That sidewalk isn't going to sweep itself.
Oh, that was so fun, Nate. Thanks for sharing that. After lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm, I was nearly late to my night shift as a line cook in Rochester. One of the great titles, too, speaking of titles as we were earlier in the show. That was a lot of fun. Thanks for sharing it, Nate.
Thanks a lot.
Yep, take care. Nate Jacobs with the the night shift. I won't read the long title again, but it was a great one. Let's see. Next up is Guy Chambers. Haven't seen Guy in a bit.
Hi, Tim.
Hey,
yeah,
Guy.
I've been around for a while. I've been busy and all that, and plus being out at the lake there and having a few beers and doing some writing. So I don't have a prop poem this time here. And this is a brand new one. I just written this up just for now. I give a little bit of note how it came about. So I call this one here Kilter Street.
All right.
walk one's way in Lou Reed's Berlin, tucked in space on the edge of the curve, shuffling the sidewalks. Walls in a pocket, bitten from the tongue, angel words unspoken. Smudged pockmarks, high, strong makeup, painted high-stake legs, standing out. A bar stool lady, tip a drink to get to reality. The only thing that one knows, and can't leave it alone. Graphic antics, 2-bit friends, cure all in a shoe size until the music ends. Eager hunger, reeling real, time to time, harped on the earshot, black and blues, part of the game. Thumbs cuffed, can't get enough, wayside throwaway in a blink of an eye. Soon Berlin trends, threads the ends, and then here on be bygones on Kilter Street.
Oh, really cool
That's
ending,
from,
especially. Yeah, thanks, Guy.
Yeah, that was from an album by Lou Reed way back in 1972 called Berlin. It's all about, it's a whole story right through the whole album. I still think it's still one of the best albums out. And he did a movie, like a live performance of that whole movie, I think about 5 years ago. It was on the movie channel. And I thought it was really done, well done. So this is more kind of what's it all about. So I don't know, I decided to write about it. So.
Well, very cool. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Guy. It was good to see you again. And although I understand, summer's out in the lake, not a bad way to spend it either.
Yeah, you betcha. Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right, take care. That was Guy Chambers with Kilter Street. Next, we have Brian O'Sullivan.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Brian. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. It's a great interview. These are great poems. This is one of my favorite prompts ever. It's great.
Yeah, it's a good one. It definitely is. And so, you've got a proof rock.
have, Waking Proof Rock, and I assume probably everyone knows that, and also it's long, and I don't want to have to read the whole thing. So I'll just go to mine if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Waking Proof Rock. After we drown. In the room, the mermaids come and go, chatting with Michelangelo, and they say, "How well you have resculpted him. His skin, but little paler than it was wont to be. His hair a little thicker as he would want it to be." They smile at their own cleverness, I guess, and at their magnanimity that they spare a thought for me. So would it then be worth it, after all, if I sprang up from this coffin, from my wreck, and boldly dare to say, "I am back, unexpected, to tell you all, and I shall tell you all, T.S. and the Baptist, Hamlet and Polonius, and you, yes, you, quiet guest, who might have walked with me, doomed companion in my misery." Well, what was I going to say, after all, and what is the question that I might have asked so overwhelmingly, except perhaps, what in the hell was wrong with me? So close, so near, and yet so morose. The question, Al, is not for you to ask you or me to ask me. It's what ails thee. If we'd asked others that, we might have roused the anesthetic skies and rose to be the Fisher King reborn, and we might have bloomed again with everything, with every mustard seed and every grieving home. Instead, a broom handle through a laptop screen, a crack between the proof and the rock, a thesis lost, a bottle of Smirnoffs in a cheap hotel, a sickly smell. It's all ridiculous as hell. And this, I thought, is what you taught me. But it would not be worth it, after all, to tell you thus about yourself, if I did not think I'd hear again your voice saying, "Careful, don't be a fool." When I think of you, I remind myself, be careful not be the fool. The fool comes bumbling in, but tells the truth, and that's a win. But I can't tell the truth every day in every way. I'm not that brave. Maybe just a foolish poem here and there. And so it goes, and so it goes. And still we clatter in our caves and slumber, dreaming with Michelangelo, till Dan's voice wakes me, and we go.
That's wonderful. I love that. Thanks for sharing it. Waking Proof Rock, Brian O'Sullivan. Excellent use of the form and getting the sounds of Proof Rock in there too.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care. It's Brian O'Sullivan once again. Tom Barlow is up next.
Thanks, Tim.
Hey, Tom.
I wrote a sequel to a poem by Gary Soto called Telephoning God.
Oh, I love that
It's
poem.
not very long, so
Yeah.
it's okay if I could read it.
Yeah, feel free.
Telephoning God. Drunk in the kitchen, I ring God and get Wichita. Angela, drunk and on the bed's edge, undoing her bra. Dial again, and Topeka comes through like snoring, though no one sleeps. Not little Jennifer yelling, but mommy, nor Ernie kissing the inside of his wrist, whispering, this is a gorgeous evening. Dial again, and the only sound of spoons crashing in a cafeteria in Idaho. A little silence, then a gnat circling the ear of Angela, beaten and naked in the vineyard, her white legs glowing. Mm. So I wrote the sequel, FaceTiming God.
All right.
After Telephoning God by Gary Soto. 3 a.m. drunk in the back seat of the Greyhound between Cleveland and Memphis. I FaceTime God and get Reykjavik. Gunnar, also drunk on Equavit, changing channels on his television every 30 seconds. FaceTime again, and Abilene comes through in a Cadillac. Henry call me Hank. Henry, call me Hank, on his way to the Chick-fil-A. Gosh darn slow drivers. Then Fort Myers and Tyler, daughter hugged to his chest. Mommy didn't mean that. Once more, and only the sound of a fire axe repeatedly striking a barn door in Wichita. A little silence, then the steam off an apple pie. Then the sweat pouring off Angela in the kitchen, scorch marks on her proffered palms.
Oh, very fun.
Sorry, I think I read a different version than put on the
I was close
screen.
enough. Yeah, great. I love the spinning from telephoning to FaceTiming God. Yeah, another really fun one. Thanks for sharing that, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, always a pleasure. It was Tom Barlow, once again, with FaceTiming God. Let's see. Next is Carolyn Codd.
Hello.
Hi, Carolyn. Yeah, remember, it is quiet, so try to get close to the mic.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I don't have a sequel of anything. I have something that's quite different. It came from a prompt, but the prompt was from something at my church.
Mm-hmm.
That was, people made a whole lot of origami figures, and we were invited to pick one out that caught our eye and then do something different with it.
Yeah. And
they mentioned including writing. So this is, I don't know if you can see, this is what I ended up with.
Oh, wow, that's really cool. I love that.
Thank you. So the top thing that caught my eye, it's kind of a bird or a plane or something.
Mm-hmm.
And lately, also, I've been kind of obsessed with the idea of being a citizen of the world, a global citizen. So that's how I came up with this idea. And this is what I wrote. I wrote part on the little cloud, and then the rest is on the
Mm-hmm.
globe. And this is what it says on the top cloud. Is it a bird, a plane, a way to escape for a while above the earth? But I don't have wings. And then the lower cloud says, God made me a creature of the ground. This great blue globe, this is my home. There's much to do here. Save the planet, save the people.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love the mixed media, a mobile almost of a poem. That's a really neat way to present a poem. Thanks for sharing that, Carolyn. Very cool. That was Carolyn Codd with a mixed media composition. And next, let's go to Paul Mitchell Bernstein.
Hey.
Hey, Paul. Good to see you again.
Good to see you guys. So I reset the poem with the original, or I don't know if I did a sequel to She Being Brand New by E.E. Cummings, and I ran into the exact problem you talked about. I mean, E.E. Cummings is a big influence on me anyway, but I really found myself trying to, I was throwing stuff in parentheses and breaking stuff up weird, and so I pulled back. And actually, I originally submitted it via Submittable, but I withdrew it twice because I was afraid that it didn't meet the qualification of being a completely original work. Anyway, yeah, and thanks, Katie. This is an awesome prompt, by the way. I do these kind of things a lot, actually. A few weeks ago or something, you critiqued a poem called "A Song for Dear Henry," which is based on Dream Song #1 by John Berryman. I do a lot of responses to Berryman's Dream Song. I'm working on a whole series of them.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a great way to get poetry flowing is by responding, because poetry is really a big dialogue too, so it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, stuff that inspires me and touches me, and E.E. Cummings is kind of one of the reasons. He's the first poet I ever read where I was like, wow, this is cool and sexy, and anyway, okay, so I'll read the original first.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
She being brand new and, consequently a little stiff, I was careful of her, and having thoroughly oiled the universal joint, tested my gas, felt of her radiator, made sure her springs were okay. I went right to it, flooded the carburetor, cranked her up, slipped the clutch, and then somehow got into reverse. She kicked. What the hell? Next minute, I was back in neutral, tried, and again, slowly, barely nudging my lever right O, and her gears being in A1 shape, passed from low through second into high like greased lightning. Just as we turned the corner of Divinity Avenue, I touched the accelerator and give her the juice good. What?
It was the first.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was I didn't see it. It was the first ride, and believe we was happy to see how nice she acted right up to the last minute. Coming back down by the public gardens, I slammed on the internal expanding and external contracting brakes both at once and brought all of her trembling to a dead standstill.
That's great, and I've never read that poem before. Somehow they didn't teach that one in school, unsurprisingly.
Yeah,
you
can see why
the thing about
as a teenager.
Yes, Cummings, he's just so mellifluous with his language. It's just so creative. It's always fun. I think he gets a bad rap because of all the play with the syntax, but the lines are just wonderful. So let's see what your version of or your sequel is.
Okay, so my sequel is called Still a Little Stiff. It literally, the title starts with the last word of the poem. Still a little stiff, I glanced into her rear view, saw the cherry lights of a black and white, and moments later, incidentally, with she still trembling in bliss, was informed by a slim and blustering young cop about the stoplight back on Divinity Street I'd missed. I assured him I had not. I explained to him, in fact, I was a poet, a man deeply concerned with the details and colors and nature of things, and that she, being brand new and still a little stiff, had got her accelerator pedal stuck real tight. So tight I was unable to stop for the light, but that I'd got it all worked out now and everything was all right, and that I just stopped here in the gardens to let her rest for a while. The cop, being a lean and young new bull, all full of cock and swagger, with his hand on his heat, had mercy and warned me to be more careful on Divinity Street. And in the mirror, as I watched him walking away, I lit a cigarette for a little bit and sat there thinking about his sway, considering his warning, and then released her brakes, slipped the stick into gear, and oh so slow rode her down into the morning.
That was great, Paul. That was a Still a Little Stiff by Paul Mitchell Bernstein, and you really did keep the feel of it while also making it your own. I think good job with that. It was a tough thing to do with Cummings.
Oh, thanks for saying that it was my own. Yeah, I was afraid that I was just kind of trying to sound like Cummings, which I probably do a lot.
Well, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Excellent. Good job, Paul.
Thank you.
Right, take it. As Paul Mitchell Bernstein was Still a Little Stiff after the Cummings She Being brand. Next up is Mike Bales.
Interesting challenge. I think it's a nice way to pay tribute to poets we like.
Yeah, it definitely is.
I did a few. I did kind of my sequel in the vein of like fiction writing, where you kind of continue the story. It's kind of like her writing, but a little bit different. I can read her poem. It's so It's a little over 2 pages, or it's a page and a half where I can just read the beginning.
Yeah, why don't you
then
just
go
read the
to
beginning
my-
and like summarize a little bit because we gotta get through. Yeah.
The first thing I'd like to say about it, which I like to continue, I think it says a lot about us. It's a weird mixture of play and violence. The beginning of it's Dora Malik, who read, I mentioned her before, read at a poetry event around here that's called Spectra. I mentioned Spectra before, and I followed her for a long time. She now teaches at Johns Hopkins University. And this is the beginning of Party Games. The first thing she did after we blindfolded her and turned her in circles by her shoulders was lunge for where she thought her target hung, and hit the tree instead with one strike against and split the spike in half the jagged dagger in her fists. Then I can kind of go from that. First time she didn't succeed, and this is after her first try.
All right.
It's called The Games They Played. The girl, still blindfolded, held the broken stick as a sword. She cried out in delight when giving a second chance. She felt the eager gaze of her friends as she reached into the air for the anticipated reward. The donkey offered a smile and danced on a string, while her friends shouted and cheered. This time with a gasp and a swing, her sticks tore paper flesh, scattering candy onto the ground, and she took off her mask. In a frenzy, the people at the party ran and gathered the objects they desired. The taste of conquest sweet, while a hollow-bodied swayed.
Oh yeah, excellent interpretation. Who was the original poet?
Dora Malik,
Laura
Malech.
Excellent.
She's someone to check out. I like her style. This poem was actually in the Best American Poetry in 2015.
Ah,
Her
okay.
poem, Party Games.
Well, very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. Great sequel to it too, Mike. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, take care. This is Mike Bales with the game they played. Nancy Sobanek is next.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
Hi, Nancy. I'm great. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to read Charles Simich's The Mystic Life, and it's short.
Okay.
It's like fishing in the dark, if you ask me. Our thoughts are the hooks, our hearts the raw bait. We cast the line over our heads, past all faith, past all believing, into the starless midnight sky until it's lost to sight. The lines long unraveling, rising in our throats like a sigh of a long day's weariness, soul-searching and reverie. One thought against the supreme, unthinkable. How about that? Looney Tunes, fishing in the dark out of an empty sleeve with a morning band on it, the fly and the spider on the ceiling, looking on, brother.
Very interesting. That was The Mystic Life by Charles Simic. Always interesting, Charles' poems.
So I had written this a little time back for a Charles Simic contest. And mine's more of a response than a sequel. And I wrote a golden shovel using 3 of the lines from the poem. So I titled the poem, Our Thoughts Are the Hooks. There was one who fished for men. Our feet follow his hard scrabble way. Our thoughts promise milk and honey, but wild goats are elusive. Instead, we find jackals. The scent of our sweat and blood hooks that which is unwholesome. Our fervent desire for a feathered heart to wing us to Canaan, for the calluses formed have torn. Raw and bleeding, we become baked. Though we witness the constant cull, rising is the banquet that draws us in. Better to walk than lie, waiting on our own altar, offering our throats. Instead, we lift our redemption song. Like Saudade, we feel for our lost home. We sing a melody where joy is tinged with a sigh.
Excellent ending. Yeah, and great images throughout. That was Our Thoughts Are the Hooks. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Nancy.
Thank you.
Yep, that was Nancy Sobolink with Our Thoughts Are the Hooks, a golden shovel. And of course, if you look at the screen, you can see the Simic. Our thoughts are the hooks, our heart, the raw bait, rising in our throats like a sigh. Down, hidden in there as the golden shovel form asks you to. Thanks for sharing that, Nancy.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's sort of a double duty there, doing both a golden shovel and a sequel. Sequel is the word. Let's go next to Mary Lisa DiDominicius. Hey, Mary Lisa.
Hi, everybody. I agree with Caitlin. This was a difficult prompt, but it was a lot of fun, too. I also feel like a little bit of a minimalist compared to everybody else tonight. Oh, my goodness. Such wonderful responses. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, they've been great poems so far. It's fun to read, other poems by, well-known poets who I haven't heard before, too. That's really fun to see what everyone's picking.
Yeah, really good. And it was difficult because I was like, how do I live up to this? I can't live up to the original poem, So, all right, I'll read. The first one is short, and then I'll just go right into mine.
Okay.
And she'll show it on the screen, right?
Yep, go ahead.
The Friend by Marge Piercy. We sat across the table. He said, cut off your hands. They are always poking at things. They might touch me. I said, yes. Food grew cold on the table. Food grew cold on the table. He said, burn your body. It is not clean and smells like sex. It rubs my mind sore. I said, yes. I love you, I said. That's very nice, he said. I like to be loved. That makes me happy. Have you cut off your hands yet? No, I said. I stood up to leave. Let's go with plan B. I can't cut off both hands with only one hand. I can't fly with only one wing to span my flight. You misunderstand. My body is not a house for your haunting. My heart is not your dinner. I'll starve, he said. That's very nice, I said. I'd like you to starve for a bit so you might know hunger. That would make me happy.
Oh, another poem with a strong ending. Thanks for sharing that, Mary Lisa. That was The Friend by Marge Piercy and a sequel to that. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Always a pleasure.
Always fun. Yeah, great night.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, Mary Lisa DiDominicius with that sequel. And next we have Mark Grenier.
Hunger. That would make me happy.
Oh, another poem.
Hey. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
I'm doing good. My sequel is after William Carlos Williams's poem, The Descent, which I don't know whether people know it or not, but it's one of my favorite poems of his.
Do you want to describe it a little bit so we can, get to know where we are?
I'll read a few lines of it, maybe not the whole thing. It's a little long to put on to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it's a series of lines that first appeared in Patterson in the long poem Patterson, in which he later published as a complete separate poem called The Descent. And it begins, the descent beckons as the ascent beckoned. Memory is a kind of accomplishment, a sort of renewal, even an initiation, since the spaces it opens are new places, inhabited by hordes heretofore unrealized. And it goes on in that vein and talks a little bit about love and things like that. And my sequel is called Homage to Williams in Old Age, and I quote from the poem. After multiple strokes, it seems, the thing itself became the loss of time's impress, where descent beckons as the ascent beckoned, where a mountain's rise attempted left the failure to reach that peak, and scaling Parnassus heights made absent memories become a kind of accomplishment, a descent into the deep, into the deep, darkest ocean depths, where winter's cold retreats from surfaces of sunlight to darkness deeper than night, the depths beneath all light, where mudflats squirm with the evolution of worms, and cold-blooded fish compete as predators for prey, becoming prey themselves, as we are also prey to sharks of ancient lineage attacking from the depths. Where what was known is forgotten, and light no longer reaches, however hard we strive for youth, for the sunlight high above us beckoning toward the beach, where lust and love defined what once enriched our lives, touch transcending time as we joined our lives together, like Bill and Flossie did, beginning their time together in a century of pain. We faced this threat ourselves when the Vietnam War interfered with our hopes for peace together, making memories of days when the crash of surf against rocks, instead of raising rainbow praise, broke spray into salty tears that soaked our youthful cheeks, crystallizing disenchantments, reinforced by a dream's defeat, by the return of ancestral prejudice, the end of our trust in governments, the end of our hopes for peace. So I turned toward damaged victories lost in time's inexorable worst, to the strike of a yellowtail taking bait and racing off in the night, killed by a sudden shark attack that left a shredded piece, another dead memory burning through the sting of blowflies distracting me from the years we spent together in America's golden west, reading the little left to ask of this poem's implied conceit.
Oh, that was great. Great rhythm in that poem. You can really feel the love for the original poem. It's really all right there. Thanks for sharing that, Mark.
Yeah, it's done in the triadic line that Williams used for that poem, which is something I've been doing off and on.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Very good interview today.
Yeah,
She was wonderful interview.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that was Mark Grenier with homage to Williams in old age. Yeah, excellent work. And then let's see, Laura Berg is next in line.
Hello. What a wonderful evening. What wonderful poems everybody is creating and sharing.
Yeah, definitely.
So enjoyable. So I picked out Eating Poetry by Mark Strand.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody maybe knows it, but it's short. Okay. Ink runs from the corners of my mouth. There is no happiness like mine. I have been eating poetry. And so on and so on. Yeah?
Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm.
So I just made a fun poem called What Poets Eat. Ink still runs from the corners of Mark Strand's mouth. Ah, yes, he's eating his words, manna like frost, like dew. And who sits beside him at this banquet? Who hones the knife? Whose fork glistens? Who taps a spoon? Who's first to rip sinews from bone and eat up what we poets serve? Or is this unusual meal composed of us, only for us, we banshees, we vampires, we cannibals?
Oh, that was great. Very fun response. Yeah, excellent. What Poets Eat after the Mark Strand. Thanks so much for sharing that, Laura.
Thank you.
It was Laura Berg with What Poets Eat. Try to move a little quicker now as we go through, and Rob Harris is up next. Hey, Rob, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for giving me a chance to share this. The poem I used was taken from Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology.
Mm-hmm.
Probably what the most well-known is The Hill, which kind of sets the tone for the whole book, but I chose one that was a little more obscure. Hopefully everyone's familiar with the story, but this is Seth Compton who's dead, and he's telling his story on the tombstones in the graveyard in the fictional town of Spoon River, Illinois. And so this is Seth Compton's story, and this is the one I'm going to start from. It goes like this. When I died, the circulating library, which I built up for Spoon River and managed for the good of the inquiring minds, was sold at auction on the public square, as if to destroy the last vestige of my memory and influence. For those of you who could not see the virtue of knowing Volney's ruins, as well as Butler's analogy, and Faust, as well as Evangeline, we're really the power in the village. And often you ask me, what is the use of knowing the evil in the world? I am out of your way now, Spoon River. Choose your own good and call it good. For I could never make you see that no one knows what is good who knows not what is evil, and no one knows what is true who knows not what is false.
Yeah, interesting poem there from Edgar Lee Masters. Yeah.
I took that challenge, and I think Seth Compton still speaks to us all today. So I wrote something called Paging Seth Compton to build on what.
Very cool. Go ahead. Yeah.
It goes like this. Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River anthology was published more than a century ago. Its enduring popularity derives from it telling truths about the human condition. The most compelling message of all comes from the story of Seth Compton. Compton had loaned out his vast collection of books as a public service to the people of Spoon River. After his death, the books were publicly auctioned off as a final rebuke of the work he had done. Compton's parting shot from the grave might as well have been written for all of us today. No one knows what is good who knows not what is evil, and no one knows what is true who knows not what is false. As the big lie continues its relentless spread, we must strive to continue Seth Compton's work. So a little bit of a political edge, but the idea is read and learn. And if you don't read, then you'll never learn. And that's what I was getting at with this.
Yeah, a political message and an excellent one. Thanks for sharing that after Seth Compton. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you. There's Rob Harris, of course, with Paging Seth Compton. And next we will go to Bishwajit Mishra. We have 3 people left on the lines.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Bishwajit. How you doing tonight?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great.
I won't waste time. We have a lot of people. Okay. I sent 2, but unless you have a choice, I'll pick one. One is a sequel to, what's his name? Robert Frost, Snowy Evening poem, Stopping by Woods. And the second one is a after poem to Louis Gluck's, Penelope's Stubbornness.
So it's totally up to you. Whichever. I haven't read either of them, so I don't know. Whichever one you prefer.
No. I mean, Robert Frost, everybody knows Stopping by the Woods in an evening, snowy evening. That's a very popular poem.
That is probably the most popular poem in the last 200 years, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's one of the first American poets that I consciously picked and read.
Oh, that's great.
We read Weak Man in school. I didn't even remember until recently. So
yeah, let's do that.
I'm going to read Louis Gluck because it's a smaller poem, and she's one of the contemporary poets. And I never tried. I mean, I don't understand her poems well. I just made a disclaimer at the beginning. I just tried. It's very courageous.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so the original poem is on the second page of my submission. It's called Penelope's Stubbornness. Louis Gluck. A bird comes to the window. It's a mistake to think of them as birds. They are so often messengers. That is why, once they plummet to the seal, the seat so perfectly still, to mock patience, lifting their heads to sing, poor lady, poor lady. Their 3-note warning, later flying like a dark cloud from the seal to the olive grove. But who could send such a witless being to judge my life? My thoughts are deep and my memory long. Why would I envy such freedom when I have humanity? Those with the smallest hearts have the greatest freedom.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think I knew that poem, and then with the last line, I remember it.
Yeah,
it's a very memorable last line.
Yeah, that last line. Yeah. So mine is called, sorry about the number, I missed it. I have it. I don't know. In the submission, you have a number. I'm reading from my copy.
Okay.
It's called Odysseus' Helplessness, after Louis Gluck's Penelope's Stubbornness. You might have had the wrong end of the telescope, because all I eat every day is to grow my heart. And it's no mistake that I wear that on my lapel like a red poppy. And freedom is a falcon, tamed to sit on my shoulder. Freedom, holding its head high, yells, poor people, poor people. Its 2-syllable call for its need to be won and imposed like a thunderbolt issuing from roaring clouds. In the meantime, the little birds can come to your window for me as I go on showing my large heart to all until the last heart on earth, for the sake of humanity, gives in to my freedom.
Oh, that was great. Thanks for sharing that, Bishop. Odysseus's
Thank you.
helplessness. And a really cool poem to be writing after and really fun. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Good night.
Good night. Bishop Mishra once again. And then let's go. Oh, this is the first time caller, I think. Johnny Yo. It says John Yo on the screen. And I think that's John O'Halloran. Are you there, John? So I'm asking on.
Hi. Tim.
Hey,
how's it going?
Yeah, it's going great. Good to have you on. Your camera's not on, but you don't need to. It's not a requirement.
Okay, well, I'll try.
Oh, there you go. Yep, we see you now too.
Okay.
Yeah, and where are you calling from? I'd like to know.
Yeah. So I don't know I didn't know the format, but I was kind of good to get on. I wanted to see what you guys were doing. So I've pretty much been here all night watching you.
Very cool.
Annie, and she was cool.
Mm-hmm.
You must do a lot of work. You got a lot of work. You must read a lot of poetry.
I definitely do. That's definitely a sure truth has not been spoken in a while. Yeah, that's true.
I sent you actually a submission that I did for your chapbook. Just not knowing it's one poem, and so I don't have a favorite, but I will the next time but I could read a poem from that if that's good.
Yeah, that sounds good. Which one would you like to read?
I think I'd go to the bottom.
The bottom. Okay, yeah.
Hopefully, same. So, upon the ocean's floor, I think is what the poem is called. I think it's the last one.
Yeah, it is. I have it right here. So, whatever is do you want to introduce it and say what it's about at all, or just dive in?
I'll just dive in because I don't know what they're about until I read them a couple of times, and then they tell me what they're about.
Well, very good. Well, that's the best way to do it in my book. So let's hear it.
Yeah. So anyway, it's called Upon the Ocean's Floor.
Okay.
I've fallen on the road to Damascus, and I'm not sure, can I get back up? In all of I had blindfolded been to this hour. I see.
Actually, John, you're kind of breaking up a little bit. Do you want to? Hey, John, hang on.
Right.
You're kind of breaking up, and sometimes it might be the bandwidth. Why don't you turn off your camera, actually, even though I asked you to turn it on, and that'll help out. And then take it from the top.
Okay, let me go back to you, and then I'll turn off the camera.
Yeah, that's better. We'll be able to hear you now. It was just chopping up.
Okay. Take 2.
Yeah.
Upon the ocean's floor, I have fallen on the road to Damascus, and I'm not so sure I can get back up. In all of my certainty, I had been blindfolded to this hour. I see only sand and harder miles ahead, so I will sit here and reflect upon the miles I've come. Not all miles of harmony and light, many miles of cruelty and blight. When moments held their promise to behold, at times I failed to absorb more wisdom than a fly on a kitchen counter. What brain I had for love and for compassion when my sleeves were rolled up for work and then for fun. I have followed in my shadow's footsteps and come to hear, out of breath, tired, and with a broad mouth, follow of a smile. I cast my eyes into my chest to hear if there is the stir of my heart. Dry tears fall down, furrowed cheeks where laughter danced a time ago in the open hands of alacrity. And stumbling under rum, I fell into the company of arms, only to fall away again from promise and then regret. Let the sun burn my loins to ashes, that I may sprout and hold the time for color and a more refining eye.
Yeah, great poem and very well read, John. A great cadence to your voice. A beautiful poem there, Upon the Ocean's Floor. Thanks for joining us and for sharing a poem.
Thanks very much, Tim.
Yep. Take care. Come back again.
Cool. All right.
Bye.
Good night.
was once again that was John O'Halloran with a poem from his chapbook. Now we have one last poet on the line, and that's Lucy Chow.
Hello, Tim.
Hey, Lucy. Thanks for your patience. It's been a long night, but we got you in.
Yeah, it was an amazing night, and everyone was just so great.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So, what do you have to share with us?
I wrote kind of a poem sequel to a poem by Denise Levertov. It's this poem, in California, morning, evening, late January. It's not that long, so I guess I'll just read it and then I'll share my poem.
Okay, sure.
Pale, then enkindled, light advancing, emblazoning summits of palm and pine, the dew lingering, scripture of scintillas. Soon the roar of mowers cropping the already short grass of lawns, men with long nozzle cylinders of pesticide poking at weeds, at moss in cracks of cement, and louder roar of helicopters off to spray vineyards where braceros try to hold their breath, and in the distance, bulldozers, excavators, babble of destructive construction. Banded by deep oak shadow, airy shadow of eucalyptus, miner's lettuce, tender, untasted, and other grass unmown, luxuriant, no green, more brilliant, fragile paradise. At day's end, the whole sky, vast, unstinting, flooded with transparent mauve tint of wisteria, cloudless over the malls, the industrial parks, the homes where the lights going on, the homeless arranging their bundles. Who can utter the poignance of all that is constantly threatened, invaded, expended, and constantly nevertheless persists in beauty, tranquil as this young moon, just risen and slowly drinking light from the vanished sun? Who can utter the praise of such generosity or the shame?
Yeah, very
And
interesting.
my poem actually takes off from that point in the poem where she says, miner's lettuce tender untasted, because it got me thinking about what if that fragile paradise, its tender green, is actually tasted. So my poem is a poem about tasting that which is endangered. It's called Indian Asters and Shepherd's Purse. And shepherd's purse is actually a kind of wild plant that is commonly foraged as a delicacy here in China.
All right. Yeah, let's hear it.
It's got an epigraph. In 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on, by Robert Frost. Then, at the other edge of the field, on the other end of the world, in China, sun at summit, westering, early September, I feel the pain again of imponderable beauty. The cadenzas of calendulas and zinnias, galloping glissandos of color, crashing every hour of day into one star map, dawn lavender, morning mauve, midday's gamboge yellow, maple syrup of 4 p.m., distilled and mellow. Cosmos, namesakes of the world, regal purple, ruddy realgar, dahlia, cinnabar, my side singed, every blaze a scimitar, a butterfly with weary wings on a wooden walkway of the park. Its fragile bluish silver flits to Indian aster, lilac eyelashes round apricot pupil. Squatting quietly, I want to stay its shadow. Standing up to walk on reveals more clusters of bloom. Autumn's morning star, Indian aster. Once my family gathered wild greens, sallying out to waysides, wheat lots, margins of surging, wind-waving wheat fields before the buds burst, full fire, for a first tender taste of thinly fussed leaves. 1 degree of pungent, 1 degree of sweet, the rest all umami, elusive as an itch in a phantom limb. We dug with bent spoons, washed dirt from roots, soaked pale, slender napes swished by wavy, luscious hair. We let them roll on our cutting board. We squeezed them into tight balls, reserving the juice for drizzling spiraceous mushrooms. We made wild greens dumplings with shiitakes and tofu. No, that was not September, but spring. Not aster, but another feral fairy fittingly named shepherd's purse. Grandfather took us on foraging trips, tenderly passing on wild green sabi. Search for the tender ones before flowering, before growing those little flat triangular purses from which Lilliputian purloin fairy gold at night. The tender ones, bloomless, penniless, are best. Graze your taste buds, and they bleed green sunlight. His body is 10 years in eclipse now. For 20 before his heart stopped start. He cared for grandmother who survived him then succumbed to Alzheimer's. She coughed and coughed, could not clear her lungs. In the commons, he cultivated wild dandelions, harvested, combed them with long white teeth of water, dried them, made her daily teas to melt the phlegm. His body is 10 years in the earth now, the earth that greens with weeds every year, faithfully without fail. He pointed out the Indian asters to us, but we never saw their roots washing clear of earth in his stout, knobby fingers, or their green turning transparent in boiling water. We would never hear him tell us whether we should never wait until the pale purple lashes flap open, whether then, in full bloom, it would be too late for the most soothing, soft, youthful taste. What he knew about Indian aster dumplings, we have to search for in online recipes. But now, right now, in late afternoon sun, as the silver flake flutters its shadow over ebulliently blooming asters, I'm not thinking about tongues of short-tailed blues siphoning nectar from phials that have just been sprinkled. I'm not thinking about everything clear streams out of our faucets cannot wash off. Everything beautiful and tasty we don't put into our mouths now. I'm closing my eyes to a field of sheer, warm light, a flower field, a family gathering of the daisies, dandelion, chicory, cosmos, zinnia, aster, the little cress with foamy flowers and little purses, welcomed as a family friend. It's home, it's safe. It's abstract, nothing but light. When the sun tilts a little lower by 4:30, I will go in as the light turns flames dimmer, dimmer, to make Indian aster dumplings. With mother, father, father's sister, what remains of my family on earth. We ordered our greens grown in glass houses. They will taste somewhat dimmer than paradise, but not without love for life. And I will breathe in a last gasp of dazzling green, gold, mauve, magenta from you, dear Daisy sisters, brothers, all of you, before I go.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Lucy. It was a great poem, vivid as always. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you, Tim. Good night.
Yep, good night. And Lucy was to wrap up the show. Let's do, Dick Westheimer has a streak going, and he asked if he couldn't make it back. He's somewhere trying to get back in time, and he couldn't. But let me, if we have a poem, he asked me to read one of his Poet Respond poems. And you know what? He's got like a 2.5 year streak. I don't want it to be ruined. So let's do one of his his poems he submitted for the Poet Respond this week. This is Storm Daniel has traced the path. Has traced the path of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey from the valleys of Thessaly and Mycenae. Of course, give me the ones with the Greek names, Dick. In Greece, to the same shore where ancient Troy would and stood then back out to sea in a mad gyre back west to Libya, home of the lotus eaters. The storm itself has reached tragic mythic status, wreaking destruction that exceeds the song about Homer's poems. Climatologists think such storms are part of a dystopian future feedback loop of droughts and heat waves, warming the seas, feeding more powerful storms, which in turn denude the land, adding to the long-term desertification of some regions. Odysseus was saved from desolation by hanging onto a fig tree. One we can surmise has already been swept away in a deluge. So that's what the note was for this poem, and it was "The Great Collapse is Us Forgetting" by Dick Westhammer. We'll keep him in the show. Here we go. The great collapse is us forgetting. I thought once that gods are the opposite of death, but I see now they are more dead than anything, for they are unchanging and can hold nothing in their hands. And that's Madeline Miller Circe. Shrink the text. Okay. Here we go, the poem. And now, the Mediterranean wanton mouth of the world, its tongue a great storm, bellows so loud even the deaf can hear. This is what apocalypse looks like. It drifts like a Homeric ship from shore to shore, washing the dead from graves and mountains, from clouds. From the valleys of Thessaly and Mycenae to the walls of Troy. The storm makes war like Achilles, severs heads, steals men from beds, lays women waste. Homes become boats with no hope of floating, and then, like Odysseus, the storm wanders and wrecks as the Furies would, guts great cities with sweeps of blood and severed members, and grinds the place and all its people to the sea to rock and ruin. This land of the lotus eaters is where we all are caused to forget. We made the war, made the storm, we are the Furies, asleep so long, who, awakened by fire, draw from the deep and cast up to the sky a great shroud, the sooted residue of us making life from death, stealing the heat from beneath, and making Hades of heaven, us all having eaten the cattle of Helios, with no fig tree to save us from Scylla's many heads. A very interesting poem. Thanks for sharing that. The Great Collapse is Us Forgetting. A great title too. Wouldn't want to break Dick's streak, so we have it in there. Thanks for sharing that, Dick. And that's going to wrap up the show. Let me go quick to the Sciku for the week. I had a couple. I wasn't sure what to do. The Sciku that I wrote originally ended up in the poem that I wrote. That was where the moon stuff came from. So I thought I'd mix it up and do something different, just so I don't have the same content. And so I wrote a story about this right here. And hang on, let me... Okay. So this is from the University of Cambridge. And this is the story right here that we're looking at. This is healthy lifestyle can help prevent depression. New research may explain why. And if you read the story, it turns out that these things are correlated with not having a high risk for depression. Moderate alcohol consumption, healthy diet, regular physical activity, healthy sleep, never smoking, low to moderate sedentary behavior, and frequent social connection. I think I did this last week, but this is another one of those ridiculous science stories, because do you think that a healthy diet saves you from depression? Or do you think that like having depression makes you not want to eat healthy, not want you to have physical activity, have less social connection? All those things are things that you do when you're depressed. So, I think they're confusing causation for correlation here. And they do this all the time in articles, just for headlines. I don't understand it. And that's from the University of Cambridge, so I don't know. And those things always annoy me. And so that's just the truth of it. So I wrote this Sciku based on that. And here's my Sciku right here. Why do the bears get to decide it's trash day? Why do the bears get to decide it's trash day? That is the Sciku for this week, and that is the show for this week. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Now, Katie had to go. She's got to put the kids to bed. So I will reveal next week's prompt. And next week's prompt, which everybody can probably guess, is right here. Write a haibun that mentions time. So there you go. We read Keeping Time by Penny Harter, and it's a book of haibun. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to write a haibun that mentions time. So that'll be the prompt for next week. And next week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be Anders Carlson Wee. So Anders' new book, Disease Kings, or Disease of Kings, I should say, is just out. I think it's from Norton. Just a wonderful poet. He read with us at the Wrightwood Arts and Wine Festival this spring, so I got to meet him. You know, of course, famously, he rode the rails and traveled the country that way. He's also a rock climber, all sorts of interesting stuff from Anders. Not your typical poet. We'll talk to him and explore his book, Disease of Kings, and we'll write the haibuns that mention time. That's going to be next week, Rattlecast number 212, Monday, September 25th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Good night.